Sorry, I thought I unmuted myself again. Angie Blackwell,
Here.
Katie Brooks,
I'm here.
Peter Buckley,
Here.
Ann Kubish,
Here.
George Mendoza.
He's on mute. He's here.
Hello, George. Cooley Thorne Ladd, we assume may be joining later. Sue Miller, chair.
Here.
And then we have Miriam Calderon, the Early Learning Systems Director of the Oregon Early Learning Division.
Present.
Excellent. And just so everyone knows, we are currently streaming live to YouTube.
All right. Thank you, Remy. And I want to also welcome our two wonderful build consultants / facilitators, etc. Carrie and Harriet. Thank you for being with us again. And David, I take you for granted. Sorry. Thanks for being here, David. All right. As we established yesterday, we're going to begin our council meetings by having a land acknowledgement based on the essential understandings of Native Americans in Oregon. And this is a way that the council's embedding our equity work in our meetings. And I've asked Miriam if she would lead us off with this today. So thank you, Miriam.
Thank you, Sue. My name is Miriam Elena. I am the descendant of people who spoke Quechua from land in South America that is now known as Ecuador because of colonization. I am a guest in these lands now called Oregon, and because I am, it is an honor to offer this land acknowledgement. We offer this land acknowledgement as we are all across Oregon on this virtual forum. This is the second essential understanding, sovereignty. Sovereignty describes the inherent right of Native American nations to exercise self-governance. This tribal sovereignty predates the existence of the US government and the state of Oregon. Tribal governments are separate and unique sovereign nations with powers to protect the health, safety, and welfare of their citizens and to govern their lands, air, and waters. We recognize the continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to Oregon and the many tribes and bands who call Oregon their ancestral territory. We thank them for continuing to teach us how we all might be here together.
Thank you, Miriam. And thank you again, Angie, for leading us off in this acknowledgement yesterday. It's very meaningful way to ground us, I guess, and provide that foundation for us that is a long-standing history of this land. Thanks, Miriam. So I don't see Alyssa on yet, and Kali is a member of the, oh, there she is, right on cue. So Alyssa's jumping on from a budget committee or budget meeting of some sort. So Kali is a member of the Education Recovery Committee, which is why we were thinking she would participate in Alyssa's presentation. But obviously, if Kali's tied up, we will appreciate Alyssa being here and filling us in on the Racial Justice Council and whatever else is going on in the governor's office. I'm sure not much. Welcome, Alyssa. Thank you for being with us today. We're used to you being in a different position at these retreats, but we're glad that you are where you are for this one.
Thank you. No, and thank you for having me. Apologies for hopping on late, but excited to join you. Yeah, I wanted to touch on a couple things with you all. Nothing going on in the governor's office, as Sue said. Things are just calm and normal and fine. Everyone just keeps saying we're going to be fine. So wanted to touch on 2 things. The first, and I know this has come up with you all, it's not a new topic of conversation, but if you haven't heard already through the Child Care Task Force, we are we know that governance is likely going to be a recommendation that comes out of the Child Care Task Force, particularly related to the employment-related daycare program and how it should be functioning within the broader child care system. So our office is working on a bill with Representative Powell, Representative Zika, and others to take a look at this governance issue and look at how we can accomplish a few things with a realistic runway. So we're looking at how we can set up the Early Learning Division to potentially be its own agency, and whether there would need to be additional programs that join that agency, including the employment-related daycare program. We're also in the process of determining what that would look like. So not trying to rush anything for like a July 1 startup, but really talk about this in a way that gives agencies plenty of time to understand the potential implications of this. What does this mean for staffing? What does this mean for eligibility? And give plenty of time to unpack all of those really weedy issues that are so important to making sure that any sort of governance shift is set up for success. So I just wanted to note that so that you all know it's something that the governor has identified as a priority. As you all know, she's continued to elevate early learning as one of her top priorities for education, but even more broadly as we think about just our system of government. So that's something that's being worked on. I think our hope is over the next few months, we'll have more information to share. Definitely by the time you all come back in January, we'll have a lot more to share about what that's looking like. But just wanted to provide that quick update to you all. The next part I wanted to talk to you about, and some of you might have heard this as we've been updating stakeholders weekly, but the governor convened a Racial Justice Council that kicked off in September. And the role of this Racial Justice Council is really to support her in the process of her governor's recommended budget that has to be released on December 1st. So this council has about 40 members. And they are charged, their most immediate charge is really looking at all sectors of government and really taking that racial equity lens to the work to recommend priorities for the governor to invest in. So one of the ways that they're doing that is they've established 6 subcommittees: health equity, economic opportunity, housing and homelessness, criminal justice reform and police accountability, environmental equity, and the Education Recovery Committee. So we have met with the Education Recovery Committee for 20 hours in the past 4 weeks to orient them to our full P20 education system. And we've broken down the education system into early care and ed, youth development, K-12 education, higher education, and workforce. So this committee has learned about each of these sectors and how they operate. They've also gotten to hear from agency directors about the legislative concepts and policy option packages that were recommended as part of the agency request budget at the end of the summer, with the caveat that these were all written end of last year, early this year, when COVID-19 happened. We had a much rosier revenue forecast. And really working with the committee to understand what should be prioritized amongst those policy option packages and legislative concepts, and what work is missing. So particularly for early learning, and I think you've seen sort of a high-level summary of these, but the Education Recovery Committee has been very clear that they want to see expansion to access of Birth to 5 programs. So they like the idea of being able to expand Baby Promise, expand our preschool programming. They're also very supportive and identified the Tribal Learning Hub, creating a Tribal Learning Hub, which we know our tribal nations have been asking for years. So really being able to get that set up and build that with the tribal nations to develop a hub that will create more equitable access to grant and funding opportunities through the Early Learning Division. We've also seen support for professional learning, so support to ensure that the professional learning system is fully funded at $25 million through the Early Learning account. And then a gap that they've identified that I think you've all been talking about as well is suspension and expulsion. So looked at some of that PDG grant household survey results. They've looked at some of the national data and really understanding that suspension and expulsion happens well before kids enter kindergarten. And they are looking at a proposal that ELD and OHA have worked on to sort of create a triage system or a warm line to try to support providers and caregivers. So there could be connections to behavioral health if a child has a real behavioral health need, but we know that a lot of what kids need is to be in a developmentally appropriate environment. We know that race, ethnicity, and gender are major predictors for who is going to be suspended and expelled. So this would really focus on providing that technical assistance and support to the provider to ensure that the child is in a developmentally appropriate setting, getting the care that they need to be set up for success. So those are sort of the big top level items that the committee's identified. And I just wanted to note too, because we've had to cover the full education system in a month, this is a somewhat narrowly defined definition of early care and education. So this committee did not have the time to dig into our childcare system. Miriam and Sarah were able to share kind of a high level overview about licensing and how it's different than how teachers are licensed, but that's really as far as you could go. So that's a big reason why you're not seeing recommendations about the child care subsidy program, which they've really left to the child care task force. That's why you don't see recommendations about governance or anything kind of related to the operations of our system. And it's simply because there just wasn't the time to get them up to speed on that. And so I think I wanted to see if there's questions about those, but also really just flag what I think is a really great opportunity timing-wise, even though it feels like the last few months we've just been working within impossible timelines. Having your retreat right now is very timely because we're meeting with the Education Recovery Committee one more time this week before they submit sort of a pared down list of recommendations to the Racial Justice Council for their meeting next week. And then they'll be getting their full list of recommendations across all 6 subcommittees to the governor. And so where I think the Early Learning Council has a really critical role to play is through Raise Up Oregon. We've seen it. You all are not just focused on that early care and education sliver of our early learning system. And so really being able to talk about those broader comprehensive supports and alignment between sectors, I think is an area of expertise that you all can bring to complement some of these recommendations and help the governor kind of see how all the pieces are fitting together, even if some of the work might live with housing or might live with the health authority and not necessarily live in our education system. So I'll stop there and see if you have any questions. And Miriam, please, if there's anything you want to add from the 20 hours you spent with the committee. Okay.
So Alyssa, sorry if I missed it. When did you say the, well, not just the Education Committee, but the Racial Justice Committee is sending their recommendations to the governor? When is that?
Yeah. So they're meeting on November 3rd. And the hope is that they'll come away with a more narrowed set of recommendations after the 3rd.
Okay, that's next week.
It is.
Just so we're all knowing November is almost here.
Yes.
Okay, and council members, I don't know how often you check your email, but I sent you an email about 5 minutes before 1 o'clock. And in that email is the document that Alyssa is referring to. So it's the recommendations from this Education Recovery Committee, as well as the synopsis of what we did yesterday, which is the next topic on our agenda today. So if you can pull up your email while we're on this call, you will see the document that Alyssa is referring to. So sorry for the late timing of all of this, but things are happening fast. So, okay, so questions of Alyssa about either the Racial Justice Council in general or the education recommendations or her governance comments that she made at the beginning. Anne.
So first of all, I'm really embarrassed, but I have to ask a very basic question, which is, what is the Education Recovery Committee? I didn't know that such a thing existed, and I'd love to just hear about what that is. I think I can guess. And then, but then with regard to your comments, so the whole, I want to talk about the governance question and setting up the ELD as an independent agency, which I think is so fantastic. I'm so excited. I think it's great. Long time coming. Just want to know where the opposition is likely to come from this.
Yeah, so the Education Recovery Committee, and there's a short kind of summary in this document that Sue sent as well with the charge, but basically it was created from a few things. Over the summer, the governor had convened a Healthy Early Learners Council that Dr. Miller joined us for, as well as a Healthy Schools Reopening Council. And they were very focused on guidance review, metrics for school reopening, very kind of COVID focused. And then when the Racial Justice Council was created, we decided to take the 90 people we had across those two councils and pull a subset of those members together, along with stakeholders from higher education, to convene the Education Recovery Committee. And the idea of the Education Recovery Committee, its primary purpose right now is to help identify education goals and recommendations for the Racial Justice Council to consider in their broader kind of prioritization as the governor makes her recommended budget. It will have a broader role, I think, in helping us and working alongside the Early Learning Council, State Board of Education, Higher Education Coordinating Commission, Youth Development Council, working across all of those boards as well as our different equity committees as well, to just sort of define what education should look like in the future and where the governor should be focusing her efforts for the remainder of her term. So we're thinking about it in a couple ways. What do we need to try to do now? And the recommendations that Sue sent you all took a couple things in mind. It looked at alignment with Raise Up Oregon in the example of early learning. And it also looked at what are high leverage investments. So what are the investments we can make right now that our field has the capacity for, that ELD has capacity for, that will help further future growth and expansion. And so as we're getting through those kind of 2021 asks, we've also got a very long list of bigger sort of system transformation requests. And so this committee is going to be helping us through articulating what those should be for our full P20 system, and what the governor should be thinking about for 2022, and ideally really handing a roadmap to her successor of what our communities, and in particular our communities of color, want to see from our full education system. And throughout this process, we want to be connecting with you all and with those other boards and commissions to make sure we're staying aligned in what that vision is. On governance,
So
I
Alyssa,
think,
Alyssa, let me just interrupt 1 second. I think council, when you have a chance to, and then we'll go to you, George, but when you have a chance to review the document that I just sent from Alyssa, I think you will be struck by the fact that every one of their priorities is one that we have also talked about. So as I review it, and Miriam, you may want to weigh in on this too, as I review that document, it's sort of reinforcing what we already know and have in many cases talked to the governor about. So I look at it as sort of a, yes, that's exactly what needs to be happening. But it's, as Alyssa said, it's very focused on the early learning, early care and education. It's not the cross-sector long-term approach that we're responsible for. So I just wanted to emphasize that. George, you had a comment or question.
More of a comment in just listening, and probably a little bit kind of like I shared yesterday. I did see at the end that there was a focus on transitions for kindergarten and preschool. So anything that is supportive of transitions, whether it's early childhood special education or preschool and into schools, that's a really good thing. Like I said, I did notice it was in the last section. And when I see recovery, I guess my thinking is like more than, it's like getting back to normal, or it's also acknowledging what we were before COVID, and then accepting and realizing the conditions, or how people are disillusioned, or how people are not regulated, or how people are needing support, and doing things during that time, which I think that's what we're doing. And then the getting back to normal, or getting back to what we were, and what we're trying to accomplish. So I guess my biggest point is trauma-informed approaches, making sure that we're doing things in a way that helps people long-term, so that their well-being is maintained. And however you do that, if it can be done integrated, that just seems like an important thing during this time. Because when we use the word recovery, I'm kind of thinking like, okay, we're doing it with care, or we're doing it with the acknowledgement that a pandemic took place, and some people are not going to be regulated like they once were.
Yeah, thank you, George. Very great comments. Angie.
Yeah, I would also just like to say I'm very happy to see the emphasis in here about the supports to programs and parents to prevent expulsion and suspension, because nobody wants to expel or suspend a child, but we have safety concerns at times, and we really need all of these professional development supports, the behavioral health supports for parents and children. So we just need the access to those supports to help us keep a child safely in a program with other children. So I'm just really happy to see that this committee emphasized that heavily. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. That's spoken like a person who's on the ground in the classrooms supporting teachers. So thanks. Any other comments concerning this piece? And then we'll go to Anne's governance question. Okay. Alyssa, if you could answer Anne's question about the governance.
Sure. So I think there's a couple of considerations, and this is why we're trying to build this legislative concept in a way that creates space. So there's all the considerations of what it would take for ELD to be its own agency. Are they going to do a shared services agreement with an existing agency? Are they going to try to bring in HR and procurement in-house? Some of those just operational pieces. I think there's going to be costs associated with those too. So really thinking about one of the big goals, I think, with governance is we think that there's a way to be more efficient with our resources. So making sure that we can balance that efficiency and not create additional costs because it's its own agency, right? So figuring out what that looks like. I think the other part that we're really looking at, and in particular with this ERDC question, is, ERDC is part of the one integrated eligibility system. So we have to be really thoughtful about how a program could potentially move when eligibility is tied into a system that lives with DHS. So thinking about and getting into the weeds on what that would need to look like, how that kind of connection can be maintained. I think those are some of the kind of big sticky issues that we really want to give time to deeply understand, and not just say we're moving everything over, it's the right thing to do, but how do we do it well?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can build a little bit about what Alyssa said, and I think and kind of your question about where the kind of pushback could likely come from. I think it's what, Alyssa was talking about around, growing kind of bureaucracy or, costs, especially I think we want to avoid those things. This is really about trying to find efficiencies. This is about being able to realize benefits of more consolidated governance and more clarity and independence around the early learning division within the state structure that will benefit children and families and communities, and why we're in service of that. And so I think those are I think some of the areas that we would kind of want to emphasize. But I think that's one point. Often it's, what is, it's hard to understand without being outside of the state system, why that kind of is so important to have some of the roles and the authorities of an agency and consolidation, why that matters so much to the ultimate outcomes that we want to see for kids and families. And so I think if we're not clear about that, then we get into a kind of situation of it's really easy to say this is, just sort of growing more bureaucracy. And so I think that would be one component of it. I think the other one that we are sort of likely to hear as well is, consolidating governance in and of itself also doesn't always mean that there's alignment, right? And so, it's important to do this in a way where we continue to, I think especially we've talked a lot in Oregon for a long time about a seamless education system, cradle to career, right? And so we want to make sure that as the way we're going about doing this, that we have and continue to have those connection points. I think with K-12 and higher ed, and I know that there's commitment to do that as we look at governance, as well as, those connection points and that alignment with the health system. I think particularly as we think about the first 1,000 days. And so we'll be really paying kind of attention to that, but that could just be another, I think, area of confusion. It's like, well, wait, if it's its own agency, what happens to a seamless education system, cradle to career, or what happens to an integrated health and early learning system? And so I think we're likely to hear those things. And then last thing I'll say, as you can imagine, this is a hard situation. I really am so grateful for the governor's support and the legislators that are supporting this. I think this is really, really important. It can be delicate for me to talk about it because, as you can imagine, people would say, oh, well, as she's trying to build a kingdom, or she, and really kind of make it somewhat personal about me. And I really, that is the farthest from the truth. I think that this is so critical. I think I appreciate you saying, Anne, this has been, something that is exciting to you as somebody who's worked on early childhood issues in our state for as long as you have, because I think we share, this is about the durability and sustainability of a lot of the important changes that have happened. I mean, we have benefited from, 2 consecutive governors who have really cared a great deal about early learning. And we've been able, I think, to make a lot of progress in these past 8 or 9, 10 years with the creation of the Early Learning Council and the Early Learning Division. And I think this is about, these governance changes, and a lot of what we're talking about is about really sustaining that and making that durable over time. And I know others like Harriet and Carrie who see this play out in other states know that that's often one of the big goals driving kind of some of these governance conversations is, how do we make changes durable? Because sometimes, it's not that, I think the future can hold that, there's going to be a governor, people aren't going to care about early learning, but, governance matters in terms of being able to protect some of those changes. I think we certainly see sometimes in other states make a lot of progress and then can, unfortunately, sometimes not even hold the gains that they made, but actually, lose some ground sometimes with changes. So I think, that's why it's really important to kind of keep driving this and talking about we have such momentum and so much has happened. How do we look at governance as a way to kind of sustain all the progress and keep us moving forward?
Thanks. Can I just follow up and say then, it seems to me that this is a time when this is an issue and a time when this council really should be mobilized and activated. And so if you could help us figure out how to be helpful to you at this moment, please let us know. I mean, anything from, talking points to advocating in places that need some push from the council members. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts about that too. It doesn't have to be right now, but over time.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and hold on one sec, George. I was just going to say that I think when we meet in January, this is a topic the council is going to really want to be on top of and involved in. And I think that's exactly what Anne's asking for, is to make sure that this is a key part of that January agenda. And part of it will be keeping informed about what's happening, but also providing input from the council perspective about, what do we think we would like to be seeing in a unified agency, and we're talking about ERDC, but we know there are other early learning programs like EIECSE that's sitting over, in ODE instead of ELD. So I think it is an area where the council could weigh in and hopefully provide not only advocacy, but also some perspectives from around the state. So, George.
And it was really just kind of sharing key perspectives or comments based on what I just heard. I think for me, I've been in Oregon now for 20 years of my life in terms of education. And once it was cradle to career and it was systems alignment, and it became learning hubs and schools starting to work with early learning providers and health agencies, and I'll just call it health and education systems alignment. You probably you got more of education, K-12's education focus or alignment, or what we say collaboration or cooperation. And I'm fearful, or I'm hopeful, I guess, that it's not lost, and that there's still a lot of coordinated, collaborative things. And if it is that learning hubs are the glue that keeps things going in between K through 3 and preschool, or even 0 to 5-year-old, there's a part there that I'm hopeful is not lost. Because from my perspective, for lack of a better word, I wasn't even paying attention to preschool or early learning prior to that. I was paying attention to 5-year-olds all the way through 18-year-olds. And now we created kind of a machine that got a lot of educators' attention to figuring out or helping out or supporting or getting in the way sometimes of what 0 and 5-year-olds were doing. So just that's a big thing that I hope is remembered or considered, so that you don't lose valuable ground that you gained with K through 12. That's probably just the thoughts while you were talking. I hope we don't lose. And I honestly think another thing is, but this is back to a K-12 perspective, early learning and its cause became far more of a focus, that it received more services and it received more support, or it received more attention by K-12. And if moving away makes us go back to focus on 5-year-olds through 18-year-olds. And if that's what people know as could be a second order or a third order consequence of that too. So just, those are worried thoughts, I guess.
Thank you, George. I really appreciate you saying that. I think it's actually, it can sound, just that was sort of part of my comments to Anne and my response around her really great question of where would the opposition come from? Because it almost sounds like counterintuitive a little bit to say that, by establishing kind of further independence or bringing more programs in that we're, I guess, somehow moving away from the kind of goal of a seamless system of education, cradle to career. And I think that that's not at all the situation. I mean, the things that are going to change about schools being a big part of the preschool delivery system, about the need for coordinated and aligned professional development and kindergarten transitions across, birth to 5 and the early grades is all still the work. I think just it's a testament, as you were talking to your 25 years in leadership and education in Oregon, that it's the most recent changes that you feel have been so impactful in terms of creating stronger linkages between K-12 and early learning. And that's really precisely the time that we have created this independence with the Early Learning Council and an independent division in the Early Learning Division. So if anything, I think it's really pointing to that, done right, the more we kind of elevate and codify a lot of these changes and make them more clear, that we can realize more alignment and coordination as we have over the past few years, certainly with education. And we know we want that to happen with health and with human services and the housing system as well. So those are the goals here.
Yeah. And George, I appreciate your comments. I think you and I have talked somewhere in the distant past about my perception that it's the kindergarten teachers who have really helped put the focus on preschoolers because they're concerned about how unprepared kindergartners are when they show up. So they're wondering, where were they before they got here at age 5? So I appreciate the fact that that K2, K3 piece is all of a sudden going, wow, we'd better figure out how we get these kids ready to sit in a circle and not hit each other. So anyway, alignment is good. Other questions of Alyssa or comments about either governance or what the Education Recovery Committee is recommending? So Alyssa, kind of following up on one of Anne's earlier comments, I hope you, and when you talk with the governor, will convey our interest in really being advocates for her early learning agenda. We know without her firm commitment to early learning, we wouldn't be where we are today in Oregon. So I just want to make sure you convey to her that we are ready to do whatever we can to support her agenda and to support you as you try to bridge many different areas of interest in your job.
Absolutely. And I will also make sure, so the Education Recovery Committee is meeting again tomorrow night. So I'll make sure you all are kind of kept up to date on what the final list of recommendations is that come out of the committee, and then what we see from the Racial Justice Council over the next few weeks.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much, Alyssa, and thanks for making time to join us.
Yes, no, thank you for having me. Great to see you all.
Good to see you. Bye-bye. Okay, well, it looks like Katie had to bounce off for a meeting, but it looks like Kali has joined us. So welcome, Kali. And we know that Angie is also here. So exciting to hear what's happening in the governor's office as always. And we'll see if Kali wants to add any comments anywhere during the afternoon. So next, what we want to do, as you know, once again, this is the other document I sent to you 5 minutes before this meeting started. So sorry about the timing, but it's a summary of the points that we made and the RUIAC and agency directors made yesterday that Harriet, Carrie, and David pulled together last night while we all went out and had a drink. They were busy putting this document together. So we want to thank the three of you once again for pulling it together so we now have a synopsis and a summary to start from today. And then what we're going to do is use this as the basis for the conversation that's following their presentation. And so now what, Council? What are the pieces that we're going to really focus on that we are going to use as opportunities of moving forward? So this is setting that conversation up. So I'll turn it over to Carrie and Harriet. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. I think I was just going to set up the conversation, and then Harriet's going to actually facilitate the conversation around this synthesis that Sue just talked about. So you'll see from today's agenda that the arc of the rest of our conversations together is that the majority of our time will be about what we're leveraging and the council's priorities and what you would actually like to communicate also back to the governor now that you also got the report out from Alyssa. You will have a chance before we close out today to touch base about the town halls and how does that fit into your 2021 priorities. We'll touch base on equity and continue to explore with you about how that should be embedded going forward, and then the actual calendar schedule of how all of this comes together. We thank the majority of you did respond to our survey yesterday, and we thank you that that did get incorporated into the synthesis that you've received by email from Sue. You also gave us some feedback about the balance between small group and large group and how to make these 4 hours feel really purposeful, but also connected with one another. So we did modify a little bit so that you have some more time in the debrief of full group time with each other, while still trying to break up the flow, since we can't do activities in person, Post-it notes, and the kinds of things that Bill loves to do. And just know we're always trying to balance the intensity of 4 hours over video with breaks, but also maximizing the precious amount of time that you can give to this effort. So continue to give Sue and us feedback as we continue to think about the flow of these meetings. We just wanted to see if there was anyone who wanted to share any reflections of where you were at the end of yesterday before I turn it over to Harriet. Is there 1 or 2 comments as you think across what you heard from the directors and the RUAC members?
I'll throw a comment in.
Yeah.
As always, it's tremendously encouraging to hear the agency directors speaking the same language, sharing the same goals. So all that effort is so important. It was great to hear from staff members who are working on implementing Raise Up Oregon, also speaking the same language, also sharing the same goals, a really strong understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. So that was very positive. Though I have to say that what kept going through my head last night was something that Joan from ELE was talking about. We're lamenting about the challenge that we have with workforce, is that we really do have to get to a place where early childhood is funded the same way as K-12, that we have a wide tax base, pay for universal childcare and preschool. And we seem a long way away from that. So that was on my mind a lot last night. We still seem a pretty long way away.
Thank you, Peter. Peter, that's really helpful to hear. Is there anyone else who would like to just add another comment? A couple of things that were also shared in the survey is that people were really struck by the progress made in Raise Up Oregon, of your review of that document, and yet still really struck by the challenges that the pandemic has done to the systems, but also the opportunity of what does building back or recovery new mean, and how do you really embed? And there were several comments related to this idea of how do we really make the equity work and the intention that all of you heard across the directors even more real than where people are starting from, of what could it really look like. So that's what some of the things that we heard back in the survey. Harriet?
Thank you, Carrie. So I'm just going to get us ready for our next small group and then big group discussion. And this part of our agenda is really to focus on where the council basically will champion, the issues the council will champion in this next period of time. And Sue sent out to you, Remy did, of course, the synthesis we talked about that we put together after yesterday. And that synthesis, we hope, is a good expression, basically, of what we heard about the progress points that have been well appreciated, that have been made so far with Raise Up Oregon, what was also a forthright conversation about gaps and next steps, sort of the next big moves. And also the input from agency directors that we had, the information, of course, that Alyssa shared from the task force that she's been helping to staff. And so all of that is in the synthesis. And as Sue has talked about this, and actually we've heard a little bit about this, we have an opportunity, basically, as things continue to move forward in terms of getting ready for the budget, to have some additional championing with the governor's office. And so the hope is that as we go through the synthesis and we can hone, then that will set up the council for some additional communication about priorities and recommendations and reinforcements and innovations, basically for work in the governor's office, for continued support, of course, for the agency directors and their staff, and also for implementation and community activities and championship for each of you. As we know, you go out to do your work in your home communities as a leader for the council. So as we're getting ready to go into those sessions, Carrie and I thought at least we wanted to start, we have the synthesis, but as observers, there were some things we really heard yesterday. And one of those, of course, was that Raise Up Oregon has so far been a good strategy for bringing people together. This idea of cross sector, cross agency, state, local, that there's been an impressive amount of work done. And we heard people on the council saying we need to continue to champion this and to be able to put that out there. We also heard everyone saying from council and others that this cross sector approach is important. And it's not one agency, it's all agencies together. And at the same time, there's a lot of discussion that all of you put on the table and others did from state agencies as well about the importance of local services, local systems building, and building a profound connection, basically state to local, and ensuring that there was local support. We also heard everyone saying that it was important to continue to advance the equity efforts that have been part of the core. And some people said we've made some progress, but not nearly enough. This has to be more than a verbal commitment. It has to be reflected in actions and in outcomes. We also heard people talking about the need to protect public sector investment in early childhood, and in fact, to grow that investment, not to be content with where things are now. And that's across all agencies. That's not restricted to one funding stream. Again, this idea that it's cross agency, cross sector. We heard a lot of conversation about the commitments that are in Raise Up in Oregon and are very important to all of you around a comprehensive approach to family support. It's not a single service. It's not just the child. It's the ecosystem, the family, and the child together. We heard continued conversation, of course, about social emotional health, basically, and there's even come up again already today. And then last but not least, and maybe we should have started there, we heard a lot of conversation about the need to prioritize and do more within childcare, okay, specifically. So those are some things just from us that we heard, basically, that Carrie and I heard. There is more, of course, on the synthesis sheet that we gave to everyone. And so what we would like to do next is Sue and Remy have divided you, of course, into groups again. So there are two groups, and I can't remember who's in each group, but there'll be one group and a second group. And one group will look at on the synthesis goals 1 and 2. And the other group will look at goal 3, because we were mindful that one of the feedbacks we got was that we keep running out of time. And so because we do keep running out of time, we want to have enough group time, but hopefully enough time in the small group to look at this and not try to look at all 3 goals. And so when we go into the groups, knowing you just got this, we will start by actually giving people some time to read the synthesis. And then we are going to just ask basically for each group to look at the items goal 1 and 2 or goal 3, depending on your group, and say, what are items here from this perspective of council as champion, council as stating what you think is important, okay, in your role for there to be continued emphasis and work. Are there items here that need to be added? Is there anything here that needs to be removed? And so we will ask each group to have a council member. There will be a note taker, but we will ask each group to have a council member who will report out. And then we'll come back together and we'll present to each other, the one group to the other and back and forth. And we're going to open it up then for discussion to hope at Sue's goals that we get to consensus, because then we want to be able to use where we got to be able to work to craft our next communication from the council and from Sue to the governor. So that is our game plan, basically, for a period of time. We took a little time from something else on the agenda to give ourselves more time for this. So we'll be in the small group for about 30 minutes and then together to share and have more discussion. I think we managed to grab ourselves about 40 minutes to be able to do that. So let's see if there are any questions about that. And then Remy will do her magic and put us into our groups. Any questions? Okay, Sue, do you want to add anything? You're on mute.
Sorry, Anne, do you have a question about this?
It's actually just a very, so we're not going to we're going to be divided into groups that do 1 and 2 and a group that does 3. We're not going to then switch.
No.
We're only going to do each one.
No, but we're going to share
Okay.
outs, and that, Anne, is how we were grappling ourselves with the fact that we clearly needed to have, I know 4 hours was long, but we needed a 12-hour council meeting. So we were trying to figure out a good strategy. And so the groups will share and we'll still have opportunity for reflection. Okay. And some work across them, but we don't have the time to do the groups twice.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Remy, do you want to send us to our groups?
Yes, and I just want to be clear, we're coming back to the main group at 2:30, correct?
I
Yeah.
have to translate everything into Eastern, so I have to
Oh,
look
sorry.
to be able to do that.
Yes.
5:30 p.m. Eastern. Yes.
2:30.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, everyone. Well, here we go. See y'all in the group rooms.
So Anne, go ahead and answer.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I would say,
Yes.
we may need to tweak the language to make
Okay.
sure that it can be pointed to as exactly the thing that Miriam.
Okay. So
Yeah.
then David will put that in the note. David, will you send Anne?
I'm trying to hit save right now, and we're
Okay.
about to send.
Okay. And I have a note on that too.
Awesome.
And our group didn't get to give Kali the bullets from our synthesis. So,
Oh, did she not get them?
no, just from our conversation. We made some additions and stuff. So I don't know.
Do you have a plan to get that? Is Kali reporting out for your group?
Yes, that's why I'm trying to have her back here.
She's here.
I know.
Okay. Okay, well, maybe Miriam, while you and Carrie, whoever, are trying to get Kali what we need. First, I hope everyone had a good time in their groups. So let's hear a little feedback. How did groups go for people?
Great.
Good. Okay. So in this section, basically, here's our plan. Since this plan seems to have worked reasonably well so far, we'll hope it continues to work, which is Carrie and I thought that we would have each group report out. And I know this is very difficult because we want everyone to talk, but we would let each reporter report out and then have the open discussion, okay, at that point. So we'll hear the total before we get into what we're going to do next to try to get to our consensus. So hopefully that's okay with everyone. And I know that Anne is the reporter for group 2 on goal 3. And I know David emailed her the notes.
In process.
Oh, they're not there yet. Okay, never mind.
Oh, shoot.
Miriam and Carrie, did you get anything to Kali? Does she have what she needs? Kali, do you have what you need?
I'm
going to try my best. Oh, you emailed me something?
Yeah, I emailed you our notes with some track changes.
Okay.
Okay, then Kali, do you want to get us started? And then when you're done, hopefully by then David will have transmitted his notes to Anne, and then we'll do goal 3.
Well, I have to get to the email, so I can begin with the summary, which is, we were focused on goals 1 and 2. I don't think what Remy sent has come yet. We were focused on goals 1 and 2, and one thing we commented is that in goal 1, there's a lot of things that are focused on the what, but not the how, and that it was important that we really look at how do we make some of these come into play, recognizing that everything on here around kindergarten, arriving ready, and transitioning is important. We talked about the assessment question of what does it mean to assess pre-kindergarten and what are we assessing for, and how do we make it more formative than summative, and how do we build on practices that are about supporting the whole child and really caring for kids as they make this transition into kindergarten and working with their family to do so. But what is the how in doing that? We talked about the importance of the social emotional learning and the wellness and just trainings in general. But how do we make it so early learning providers have access to those trainings, and what is the infrastructure that's necessary that particularly family-based providers or certified, the smaller, I would say, providers could leave their businesses to receive the training? How do we limit the gatekeeping on who delivers training, recognizing how important it is to receive culturally responsive training? I think we also talked about the importance of coordination between early learning and ODE, and just in general, the fact that the two entities working together are important. I'm still looking for this email, but wondering if it's come through. Yes, it has. Okay, give me 1 second. And then there was, in terms of the professional element of early learning educators, what are the incentives that we can provide What do we do to create teacher pathway programs, but also recognizing that there's no retirement, there's no benefits are not strong and wages are not strong for early learning providers. What are we trying to do to be able to provide more of those things so that they're incented to work, so we can get more people to work within the early learning system. There was a lot of conversation in this current time of pandemic, how important this wellness piece, wellness and well-being. And so there was reference to behavioral health and social and emotional learning, but it really boils down to the wellness and the well-being of children. And then Miriam also talked about the wellness and well-being of educators. And we all sort of agreed that in this period of time, it's clear that this issue of wellness, both for staff and for the child and for the family, is extremely pertinent. And so it'll be important to figure out strategic alliances, proper trainings, all of the things to ensure we're supporting the early learning system in that way. And a recognition that this is creating trauma, the current condition, and that there's risk to more trauma. And so some of the things with suspension and expulsions are there's a direct connection with the trauma. And so maybe if we have more of these other sort of wellness pieces, we can begin to mitigate some of that. And then on the healthy families, or not healthy families, healthy, stable, and attached, goal 2. The importance of co-locating early childhood facilities with housing, we agreed. We made some language changes and edits to that. And looking at what are the policy levers that we can use to make that happen statewide. We talked a little bit about just that one thing missing was Healthy Families Oregon, and how to ensure that there's like accountability for being culturally responsive and specific and delivery of services statewide, and not have it be so dependent upon, a particular region or program. So ensuring fidelity throughout the entire sort of service delivery model, and making sure that it works for all children. And then we talked about how essential workers, that's part of goal 2. And no, I'm clearly not recalling this one from memory. trying to consume. Every time we mention essential workers, we have to be thinking about early learning providers, and oftentimes they're not left in the equation. And so, that's very important. And what does that mean when we have this mindset of essential workers as it relates to preschool? How does that change our behavior and the way that we are supporting these essential workers and providing the resource that they need to be able to thrive? And so, I think those are the main things that we discussed. I think in the totality, there's a recognition that we're on a different playing field right now because of the pandemic, and that we have to recognize that there's opportunity perhaps to do radical things that we haven't done before, but that we'll have to continue to engage our leaders, the governor, and others to ensure that we can begin to push not in a heavy-handed way, but really seeing it as an opportunity to better support children and families. Like this current equation is forcing us to really do things differently, and there's opportunity in that. And so how do we utilize that opportunity so we have our children coming out the other side strong? I think that's it, but please fill in, teammates.
Thank you, Kali. Anyone from Group 1 have anything you want to supplement to Kali's share?
Can I just ask a clarifying question about Kali's comments? And I appreciate the conversation about wellness in children and families and staff, the whole constellation. And did you talk about that as applying to health and K-12 and all the partners, or was that just an early learning division focus and kind of ECE focus? Or was that all sectors?
I think there's a recognition the entire educational system has to focus on it, but we were talking specifically around the goal in early learning space. Yeah. ECE workers, I guess, to answer your question. I think George mentioned, and I would concur, the K-12 is in need of the same thing. We didn't talk about, I don't recall us talking about what does that look like in collaboration. I mean, I think we've talked about the importance of collaboration, but we didn't talk about that specific point as it relates to doing something together. But
Yeah.
And Kali, was I right to hear this as then the well-being, children, family members, okay, and especially early learning professionals or ECE professionals. So physical well-being, mental and social emotional well-being, and economic well-being. Those are the three sort of ways that your group was saying, like,
I
as
don't
a
know that we talked
theme.
about economic, but I think we would agree that's part of it.
No. I heard that because you talked about compensation and
Oh,
you
yeah.
know that part, that's where I got in my mind. Oh, so well-being here is these three dimensions of well-being, basically, that continue to need to be emphasized.
Miriam and George, does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I think the other thing that I know we hit on, or when we talked about that topic, was just the resilience or the grit or the growth mindset or the concept of recovery, and not just like it's what did you learn or what did you get out of it and did you grow from this thing, that kind of if we got to that point of self-awareness or resilience, 2 years, 3 years from now, that's probably the healthiest we could probably have been for our kids and for our families and for our employees. So if there is like the pathway to growth and enlightenment, I think I would be searching for that, so that we kind of make sure our organizational response creates a healthy human out of an experience like that. So I know I said something about that. That's what I was trying to allude to about the trauma-informed element. Not just knowing that we went through something, but growing and advancing through that.
I love that vision. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. So should we turn for a few minutes to Anne, who has agreed to be the speaker, the initial speaker, Anne, for goal 3?
Sure. Okay. So David, first of all, thank you for the notes. And so please help me if I don't say these things quite right. So let me just talk about some of the themes that came up for us. One was the core role of families, and to ensure that families are, family stability is crucial. Getting parent sort of voice into all of this work. A second theme was about the cross-agency and the systems level sort of work and highlighting that. A third was making sure that there's local connections with local organizations and CBOs. A fourth theme was around behavioral health, and a fifth theme was about governance generally. And so Peter started us off by saying, of course we love everything that's laid out in goal 3. The question is, how do we prioritize? And there were a few that ended up being the priority ones. The first bullet, which mentions families as well as young children. The second bullet, which emphasizes cross-sector, cross-agency work around professional development, but also we thought about it's not really just about professional development, it's about everything. Then we talked about improving the contribution of parents and providers to service and system design and implementation, which is our fourth bullet. And we also highlighted our fifth bullet, which is ensure direct contracting with local organizations. And then some of the governance questions: improve governance of early care and education, and support agency partners' legislative concepts, which is the last bullet. So we looked for ways to sort of strengthen some of the language and to specify some of the language that emphasized parent voice, family support, cross-agency system work, behavioral health, local connections, and governance. And David did a great job of sort of putting that into the bullets that we have. Another thing that we raised, or I raised, was about the specific needs of rural communities, both in terms of equitable distribution of resources, as well as the effectiveness of implementation and policy implementation in rural areas, and about how that is an equity issue in and of itself, and that it needs to be attended to. And Sue raised the issue of how much are we handling data, and how much should data be called out as an important element that needs to be strengthened for action and implementation to actually be as effective, and pointed out that we heard that from all of the agency partners yesterday. And then the last thing we talked about just as we were ending was the question of governance, and whether this third bullet should have a stronger governance language to be able to support the legislative proposal that Miriam was talking about earlier for creating an early learning division, and how to strengthen the language in some of those bullets to make sure that we have that and capture it. David, will you rescue me and tell me what I should have said, or turn it into English?
That was perfect. I think you covered everything.
Actually, there's one thing we enjoyed taking a little look at the last bullet in goal 2,
Yes.
and we have a friendly amendment to the last bullet in goal 2. And the friendly amendment that's the one around the CCOs, basically having a more specific focus on early childhood. That we got some taste of that right from Pat and from Steph yesterday as an important issue. And so we thought that it should be clear that focus needed to be both around physical and behavioral health. So that's the one other note that I had, was just a little bit of a greater specification, basically. And we know that was outside our area, but we went there anyhow.
And Miriam, I think it'll help us if you, and we may not want to pick the verbs now, but on the governance issue of, this is improve the governance is obviously global, undefined, amorphous. So I think the council needs to sort of decide how focused or how directive, I'm not sure what the word is, do we want to be to support the governor in moving in this direction. And I don't know if you have a thought about that now.
Let me look at that language here.
Yeah, it's the fourth.
The fourth from the bottom.
Fourth from the bottom.
On goal 3.
Yeah.
I mean, are we going to call out consolidation? Is that where you want us to go?
I think that would be helpful. Yeah, I can think about that a little bit. I can see what you mean. Improve doesn't quite capture it. It's kind of a little bit about what came up across our breakout too with goals 1 and 2 is like, what's the how? Like, what's the right balance of like, what's the right balance of striking in these? Like, what do we want to see happen? And how much can we really be articulate about that without getting a little bit into kind of the how? So not trying to get too weedy, in this and keep it higher level, but, so yeah, I'll think about, what language to do. I think, I think I'll just say, we know that, at least from the childcare perspective, that states that are advanced and farther ahead have quality supports, subsidy and, licensing kind of in the same entity. So I think that that is, one aspect of the governance conversation and an area where, Oregon needs to continue to make progress. And, have that in the same entity where you have state preschool and other, those things really go a long way. But governance is a big idea too. So I think the how gets complicated when where do we want the council to come out on right now? More independence as a state agency, or, other governance of other programs. So, not everything that has to do with 0 to 5-year-olds necessarily is always going to be in the early learning agency, right? But we also want to be able to kind of define what that relationship looks like. And I would just say, not just, we didn't really get into this with Alyssa's conversation, but I hope we'll get into this in January. This doesn't have implications when we talk about governance. This is, yes, sometimes it's about consolidating within ELD and thinking about kind of this structure, a certain program, like in the case of ERDC, but it's also about governance for the council. And as we think about, the authorities of the governance of the council and other areas where, we need to be more explicit about the alignment, areas in terms of the council as a policy board for the early learning system relative to, the State Board of Ed or the Oregon Health Policy Board, or some of those other areas. So this can quickly get into be a big issue that I think we can kind of continue to unpack. And so far, I feel like the legislation we don't have to have all of these questions answered in January or kind of through session. There's a phased process to this. So, maybe, I'll think about it a little bit more in this document, but I think being able to be explicit where maybe we can around programs that we think, need to be consolidated in the agency, and then maybe the importance of elevating, really clarifying ELD, I think, positioning in the state system as for early care and education might be the areas where we could be most specific right now.
So it may be helpful to look, I'm just thinking back to the work all of you did together in the spring, because this was a big topic of conversation. And I think that maybe to look back at some of that language as well that was developed from that spring session might be helpful here, and may give some additional ideas for framing out the statement on governance.
Yeah, I think, Miriam, a takeaway from our breakout group was that we're very interested in playing a role in this and not just getting reported to about what's happening, but actually be at the table, whether that's a gubernatorial table or a legislative ways and means or whatever table, but we want to be involved in helping make this happen. And Katie, you had a comment or question or whatever.
Yes, I was just going to essentially say the same thing you just did, Sue, that I have a lot of personal interest in consolidation on some things that I've seen from my end as opportunities to improve and serve the state and the state's children and families better. And so I guess what I'm saying is please use me and obviously what Sue said, our role as ELC to help you with that and tell us how we can be of use. And I do think the more specificity that we can get without going too far into the weeds, as you point out, Miriam, I think the better, because I know these journeys can sometimes be a little difficult to navigate. And we should probably think about what our role is and how we can support it in achieving this goal and what that looks like, and kind of lay it out over time with the next steps.
Yeah, good point. And
I was going to ask a question because for the group, so listening to the reports, it sounded like, generally speaking, the groups endorsed and amplified, right? Kind of what was before you. And so I wanted to confirm that because, of course, the group 2 people had to listen to the group 1 people and vice versa. So want to make sure people are comfortable with what you're hearing from your colleagues, because each of you is only in one group. And then, so maybe open that up a little bit. But then the other thing I was thinking about is Sue really just put a pin on the issue of governance as a very active issue of engagement. Okay. And so there may be some others like this that are very active. People are saying this is where you think in your role as a council member, or you see the council as a whole, right, of being especially active on. So I'd like maybe to surface if there are other issues in addition to governance. But I did want to make sure that people who were in a group, not in group goal 3 group or goal 1 or 2, if you have other questions or any concerns about anything you heard, we need to surface those here.
I can start. I can say one that kind of came up in our group, and I think we just maybe lost George for that one, unfortunately. But I know he said he'll be back. He had a meeting at 3. But Kali, anything you want to add? We did talk about the kindergarten assessment. And it's currently, I think, as everybody knows here, suspended. It was, suspended due to the pandemic. And so I think that it's been an area, I think, of interest amongst, myself and Colt, State Board of Ed, I know sort of council members, what we talked about, a lot of other stakeholders around making kind of improvements to the process. And given that it's suspended, it has, I think that there is a moment and an opportunity now as we think ahead to what do we want that to look like, or what improvements, maybe a window of opportunity that wasn't there kind of maybe pre-pandemic in the same way as what we talked about. So that would be one where I would say, Harriet, that would need leadership from the council, and sooner rather than later, if there were certain things that we might want to recommend, to begin as early as the fall, if we think it could suspension could be lifted, or whatever the right word is, come next fall. So that's.
Is there data, Miriam? Is there data to suggest? I agree. I think this is a wonderful opportunity to fix things that are broken and move forward. But again, we want to be sure that we're measuring the right things and doing it in a culturally responsive way for everybody that's being assessed. Mm-hmm. Is there data to look at different models of assessment?
Yeah, thank you, Peg. That's a great question. Yeah, I think one of the things that we talked about in the group, and Kali definitely jump in here, is that one of the things that has been really difficult around the whole process of kind of kindergarten assessments, the kindergarten entry assessments, has been purpose and getting clarity of purpose. And without clarity of purpose, it's really hard then to pick an assessment or a design or methodology, or even kind of aspire to processes that we know want to be. So I think that that's first. I think there's a lot of consensus here. We want this to be strengths-based. We want it to be culturally responsive, culturally appropriate. We want it to do lots of different things, like help guide, be part of a bigger system that helps families transition into the K-12 system, that can help inform services and supports, and can also help us understand where we need to continue to strengthen the early learning system, because we know a lot about what we might see on that assessment has to do with really an opportunity gap and other disparities based on income and race and zip code that families will experience that will show up as impacts on children's learning and development. There's also the reality, Peg, that a lot of what we know is important, we can't easily measure on these assessments. And that is, in particular, I think, kind of thinking about strengths. I'll just say some of the real the real challenges that have shown up recently with what we're currently doing that I think are most concerning and feel most urgent is that we are looking at data on a narrower set of skills of kids decontextualized from the opportunity gaps. So, and we, and it is about, a quarter of our children are emergent bilinguals, and the process, the assessment process is not working. And so that kind of even calls into the question for what we might say is the purpose of the Early Learning Council in our system of wanting this data, if it's not really picking up a lot of the strengths are telling us, giving us a really accurate picture for children who are emergent bilingual, then that becomes challenging for the purpose that we might want to use it here as a council. So hopefully I'm answering your question. I think we have, as a field now, Oregon's been doing this for what, David, 5-6 years now. So we've learned a lot. I think the field has evolved a lot, both in terms of thinking about purpose. We have more assessment tools. A lot of states have been thinking about this as a process, not just as like picking an instrument, and those could be areas where I think we could do more work. I know, there's also a lot of other mandated assessments that happen in kindergarten that I think we need to look at, because there's maybe some overlap and duplication. So I'm saying things a lot of you already know and understand, but that would be, I think, those would be some of the things that I would bring into the kind of the process to say, how do we start solving this? I guess, how do we contribute to, thinking about how we make this better? Learning from our own experience in the state, looking again at best practices, kind of other instruments, but I think it all flows from purpose. We have to be clear on purpose.
I would just add to that. I mean, I think the emphasis on purpose can't be underscored, highlighted enough, because that is what was detrimental about the initial assessment. And I know, David, you've heard me say this a lot. There are many flaws, I feel like, in the design and purpose of the assessment and the reliability of who was administering the test. Like, language wasn't even a part of it. So you didn't have to speak the language of the child. And I don't think that the families were really an integral part either, even though children exist within the context of their families, and families are partners in the work of supporting children. So I think there has to be a complete reframing and reimagining of what we mean when we talk about, and the word assessment I think triggers certain things for people. It connotes certain things, and I think that's potentially part of the problem, but I don't know how. For the people that want sort of more accountability, I don't know how if you don't use the term assessment, people are going to feel like, well, we're really not measuring anything. But that, like, when we talk about children being successful, here's where, like, I think the council can educate and help lead in the reimagining of trying to get people to think differently. Like, the purpose is for children for the kindergarten instructors to understand where the child is, who the child is, how they are, and how to support their success in the process of entering kindergarten. And there should be no room for the implicit bias that was showing up on the assessment. And there should be no room for judgment. It was the way I think it was presented contributed to how it was used. And part of that is a psyche and a mindset and shifting schema. So I guess my thinking is, the council, to the degree that we're not going to design the assessment, but can we shift the schema around purpose and bring a new narrative around what it can be, and really get people excited about what it can be and what it can mean for children. We talked a bit too about, at the end of the day, we want our children to thrive. That's the purpose of like what we're doing. How do we keep that front and center, and not in any way lessen our expectations around quality, but I don't know, it gets lost, that purpose of children thriving and the well-being of children, which is a well-rounded well-being. So I don't know, I do think that happens to be an issue that the council can play a role in helping.
Okay. And which is a great segue, Kali, because I'd love to hear from council members about where else do we as a council or individuals in our regions and networks want to focus some time and energy in the coming year. And, another piece of this puzzle is, for me, the connection to communities. And we talked about this in our breakout group, but the agency directors were very interested in how can they connect more with their CBOs around the state. And it seems to me that's an area where, once again, as you're suggesting, Cully, with KA, that we as a council and we as individuals could have an impact. So I would love to see that be a part of what we want to revisit. And we'll probably talk about it after our break when we talk about the potential for having town hall meetings. But I think that's the kind of thing I'd love to hear from other council members. Where do you see us being able to weigh in and actually move a dial?
Well, I'd like to reinforce both those points. So I do hope we get a chance to talk about the kindergarten assessment at length at some point. It being really simplistic, the kindergarten teachers that I'm working with here repeatedly say to me, they just want to know whether a child has the self-regulation skills to learn. Can a child be safely in the classroom and can a child learn? And that's their priority. And even talking about then, where does the family serve in terms of being able to help the child learn those skills? And then where is the community support for that? Those are all great questions for us to weigh in on. They're larger, kind of more philosophical questions, but I think they're vital to making a change. It has to happen.
So Katie, putting you on the spot, assuming you're just not on your video right now. I know you're—
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, I know you're a leader in childcare in the state. So I assume that would be an area where you would want the council to also be weighing in the coming year.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways. A lot of it relates to what Miriam was talking about earlier in our goal of aligning those three departments to deliver more efficiently, because you really see it on the ground when you're trying to get a pilot off the ground, when you're trying to move the needle. And I think that if there's some way to get into that, really get our fingers into what does the licensing look like, what supports are needed to actually physically bring centers or in-home or whatever the scenario is to fruition quickly and efficiently on the ground, the more I think we can get other partners on the ground to help support it. From my perspective, things just take so long to do that it's tough to navigate to folks who want to do well and are not familiar with all the things that we talk about all the time in regards to quality and equity and all of those things. So a long story short is I would like to be more engaged in what would it take to get more childcare, more quality childcare up and running. And I shared this with my breakout group yesterday. I haven't shared it with everybody yet. We had to shut down our pilot. We, for 3 years, tried to get this thing up and running. And COVID just kept getting in our way. We put out an RFQ to get a micro center running and to get an operator, a program operator, to hire the staff. We'd established almost 10 locations that were willing to do a pilot. There were issues in how long it takes to get a license. There were issues in any flexibility in allowing childcare to be in a physical workspace. A lot of good questions, but a lot of things that I think could have been handled better. We have a staffing problem, just like everybody else. Nobody wants to work in childcare right now because you don't make any money and you put yourself at personal risk of getting COVID. And employees say they need childcare. We know they need childcare and they're afraid to bring their kids. So we decided to, with all the complications that some we can actually help as an ELC, some are just a result of the pandemic, we decided to refocus our energy at the end of the year and Q1 in what does a recovery scenario look like? What can get on the ground quickly, efficiently, achieve the quality goals, the equity goals that we need, and can start small and is really easily scalable. So if I had a wish list, I would want help trying to figure out how to do that, not only Central Oregon, but statewide. How do we make this thing work? And I could go on with the economics as well. I mean, I had businesses stepping up and saying, look, if we don't have a space, we're going to write a check so that we offset the space. So one of the largest costs to operations, which is rent or physical space payment, whatever that looked like, is off the table. And I couldn't do it. And I am not happy. There's nothing I could do except say, you know what, there's another side of this, and maybe we can be ready and do something then. And our hub is engaged here, Neighbor Impact, the higher ed, there's a lot of folks who have invested a lot of time that really want to work on this after the first of the year.
Wow, I'm really sorry to hear about the pilot, Katie. I know you guys invested a lot of time in putting that concept together.
Yeah, and you know, the fact of the matter is sometimes this stuff, it really is induced by the pandemic, but there were a lot of hangups. And from a layman's standpoint of trying to get something done that I think we could do something about as a group.
Okay.
Katie, thank you for sharing about that experience. I'm really glad that you did. I wasn't in your group, so I wasn't able to hear that. But I agree. But that's kind of where I want to keep going back to also is just availability is just not there. We know that. I think that needs to be front and center on top of our list. And we're the same out here. I'm losing people because of availability and COVID, the pandemic definitely exacerbated that problem, but the problem was clearly already there. I second that. I've been trying to figure out how to say this, let's get back to increasing, it's not just we had a huge expansion in OPK and Preschool Promise. We have the Baby Promise program. It's not just the subsidized free programs. It's literal slots for all working families, for people that aren't eligible for low income. We know that poverty level is dirt poor, and there are a lot of people that are over the poverty level that even those that are under the poverty level, they may have subsidies, but there are no slots to place their children. So it's not helpful to them. So, I mean, it's disastrous right now. But I would also like to ask that when we refer to childcare, that we refer to ECE, early care and education, because if we're talking quality, people need to understand that childcare is not babysitting if we're talking quality. So it's early care and education, and we want all of our kids to have the best possible experience, and the families to have high quality. And well, I'm just glad that you brought that up, because I think it needs to be kind of in the center of all of this.
I just wanted to briefly echo what Angie, and my appreciation, Katie, for you sharing that, and definitely want to talk to you more about some of what you've learned and kind of some of what those barriers are. But for now, I wanted to just say for the council, what we know right now about supply, and David and I and others at ELD are working with our research partners to kind of understand more about what the impacts have been of the pandemic on supply. But the data is showing us we've seen a steady increase in the number of emergency childcare facilities. So more programs have opened since May. But we have about half of the capacity that we had pre-pandemic. So while we're starting to get up to kind of pre-pandemic numbers of facilities are closer to, we have about half of the supply. And David, jump in here and anything that you want to add. But I think there's a couple of probably reasons for this, and this is what we want to dig into. I think it's looking like we lost a lot more centers than we did home-based providers, or they're struggling to reopen. And I think, and where we are seeing some providers, that are open, they may not be open to their full capacity right now. And that could be, just, I think some of the things that you were touching on too, Katie, maybe they do not feel like, while we continue to hear there's not enough childcare, and we know there isn't, especially in a community where there is an in-person instruction happening right now, that especially for school age children, that there is a concern about family, in some communities, families using childcare right now during a pandemic. And so I think there's just a lot of uncertainty that maybe is keeping providers from also a full capacity. And I think we're talking about, we really need to understand who we've lost and what kind of support they need if they want to reopen. I think we need to dig into more of the issues around the workforce, and if we lost workforce, and what is it really going to take to help people kind of come back. So one is sort of the supply study, I think, to continue this conversation and the analysis. The second is just as a reminder, and this is a big role for all of you council members, is we are looking at our licensing, major rules revision of our licensing regulations in the state. And so obviously we started this pre-COVID. It's been happening for years, but now we have, I think, that lens as well to think about this. So I'm not to say that we can do some short-term solutions. I know the issue of licensing micro centers came up with a childcare task force meeting last week. So we can look at some of these things kind of in the shorter term, but I think that's a huge area for us. And then the third thing just is on the horizon is the plans for the CARES Act funding. So we still have about 23 million in CARES Act funding that the state has available, to support the childcare sector. And these are resources that we have until 2023 to expend. Not to say that we're saving, there isn't an urgency on that, just that some of the other funds that we're getting out the door right now have to be expended by December. So kind of those have been some of the priority to move out and get to providers. But we have been talking, I think, as part of that proposal, Katie, how are we, looking at specifically some supply building strategies and resources to communities around that. So
that's great. I'm totally on board with what does it look like on the other side? How do we get ready?
Yeah, exactly.
So we know childcare is on the list. And we'll have to figure out over the next period of time, what's that mean to be on a council list? It's, I guess, the how.
Are people ready for their break? I think the answer is yes.
Yes.
So we'd actually, that was great conversation. We used a little extra time. Should we take the 10 minutes now and then we'll start and catch up again? Is that good for everyone? Sue, are you comfortable with that?
Sure, we're going to be 10 minutes behind, but
yeah. So we'll take a 10-minute break now.
You got
okay, so people can stretch their legs, because we know everyone said yesterday 4 hours was a long time.
Yes, it is. Okay, see you at 3:30. Oh, not seriously.
Peter, I want to know how you got your laminated version of Raise Up Oregon recommendations. You're muted. You're muted. Can you unmute?
Our early learning hub was just giving these away like water, just giving them to people. Here, take these.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you laminate it yourself?
No, they were laminated. They had stacks of these laminated ones.
Oh.
But Anne, early child care providers still have laminating machines. They're so old fashioned, and as we've talked about, so under-resourced and underfunded that lamination is still a thing. So you could probably find someone locally who could laminate for you.
That's great.
Woo! Is it 3:30? Yes, it is. Okay, we're back. We're all refreshed. It's a new day. Woo! Okay, and the sun is still up. This is good news. So we are moving on. We've identified priorities. We know where we're going to weigh in and figure out down the road how to weigh in. Okay. So now we want to talk about listening to communities. And obviously we've already touched on this yesterday and again today. So Carrie and Harriet are going to sort of set up the conversation for us around town halls, which is just one idea of how can we encourage community engagement and play a role in encouraging that.
Right. So Harry and I were under the impression that several of you have had individual conversations about the idea of a town hall as a way to listen to communities. And over the next few minutes, about 20 minutes or so, we kind of have three simple questions for you to start to flesh out kind of what do we mean by this and what are they? And so one would be the purpose. So as you kind of talked with Sue individually about the town hall, we wanted to hear from council members about the purpose. Just so you know, the second two questions, and we can put them in the chat as we work through them, it's who's important for you to hear from. And then we were thinking another way to get at it is if you walked away from a town hall feeling successful, what did it look like, or what did you walk away with? And that kind of back and forth between those two things might help us clarify purpose and who you want to hear from. So that's where we thought we would start the conversation, is being clear about why we want to do them and the purpose for them.
Well, I'll jump in as usual.
Thank you, Peter.
To me, town halls are to raise awareness of Raise Up Oregon, raise awareness of the importance of the work being done in the community on stabilizing families and on early childhood education and services, but also hopefully to hear from parents, hear from early childhood educators, hear from hopefully K-12 educators as well, about what they're experiencing, what they're seeing. I wouldn't prioritize town halls above something like really digging into childcare access or the kindergarten assessment or how to best partner with community-based organizations. I put it lower on a priority scale to do, but I do think it's something for us to consider if we feel like we can get enough involvement and engagement to actually then we get the chance to hear from people, which I think is important. And I would do them over Zoom, obviously, and just see if people were interested.
So Peter, let me ask you, because every time I talk with you on the phone, there is some other amazing survey or interview of 20 kindergarten teachers or whatever. So you have a high level of engagement down in your area, it seems to me. So
yeah, we do. We did a series of 44 one-on-one interviews last year. Our Early Learning Hub surveyed over 400 families last December. that Head Start helped with the survey as well. So there's a pretty good amount of engagement. Family Nurturing Center surveyed over 1,000 families in the region as well. So surveys, a lot of survey has been happening. So again, that's why I would put this as a lower priority than the council actually putting time in on areas where we might be able to have an impact on the system.
I think that I like the idea of a town hall. I don't know that I don't know how I would rank order it, but one of the things that we've talked about regionally is a town hall, similarly a town hall, but for the purpose of educators more in the K-12 side, I would say not coming together during this pandemic and having space to share what's happening, and how do you get like key leaders there to listen and hear and understand what the realities are right now for teachers and educators. And I think something like that could be of value for early childhood as well. Like I think in education, I think our educators are, as Miriam said, I think ECE workers are more so essential workers in ways, but I think all of our educators are doing really important work under a lot of really difficult circumstance, and they're caring for our children. And it came up as a way to elevate what is happening and what their experiences are to the general mass population who doesn't stop to think about that. And I think there is a value to doing so if we can get people to participate. We also thought it could be valuable to the people. You know, you don't want it to be a vent session. You want people to be able to, you want it to be productive, but that ECE workers could maybe need that. It could be cathartic in a way if it's structured well, so that it's not like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I wouldn't want it to get out of hand, but I also can see it being positive for them. And then the other thing, if we're looking at it from a statewide perspective, then you're cross sort of pollinating. Like because Zoom lets us do that, like it lets our ECE workers in Clackamas talk to the ones in Malheur, and like that, like hearing that, being in that shared space, that's community building in ways, because they're all doing the same work. And how do, you know, I don't know, I see a value in it for all the reasons that I'm listing. And so I would hope that we could figure out how to do that. But again, I'd struggle to say this is more important than some of the other things that we have.
You know, you made me think about some experiences Build has had in other states when people have gone and listened to community and wonder about the cross-sector nature of your partners with the agency directors, where often when state government goes out to community, it's because they already have a project or an initiative or a set of funding to roll something out. And so they go out to community to hear, how should we best roll this out? Or here's the constraints. And what we've done in a couple of states recently is, and this was just before COVID hit, so we actually got to do it in person, is the sectors went out to just hear from communities about how is it going in early childhood? What are your hopes and dreams? What's already happening for your children? What are the opportunities you wish you had? What's hard? Have you even heard of all of our services? How do they look like? Why or why not do you participate? And then what they kind of get back is they identify things that they can actually address or fix that's not under an initiative. And sometimes it's a little less, I guess word's not exactly scary, but they're in there with their partners. So, because the community doesn't necessarily divide up health, mental health, education the way that our funding streams and our agencies do, but it lets the community just talk about what's their strengths, how do they think about things, what are their barriers, and then the state agency can be like, oh, we can divide up which things are our responsibilities and what can we possibly. So I just didn't know if there was something about that kind of aspect of the town hall and the cross-sector approach that you might want to reflect on with communities as well.
I like that too. And I guess if I can just say one other thing, I think the fact that early learning impacts, I guess, at every parent at some point in time, like there is a natural connection, but the lack of knowledge that the average person has about the ECE space is so small given it's something, even though it touches so many people. So the opportunity, and I think that cross-sector like that you're talking about is also part of the awareness, the learning that can take place. And it's like, how do you bring, the key would be to, I really would want people to come who are not panelists, quote unquote, like not ECE workers, to listen and hear and learn, because I do think there is a natural, I don't know, I was talking to a friend of mine who doesn't like taxes, but she is supporting the preschool for all. and she said, it's like, it's little kids. Like, how do you not give little kids access? And I just thought, if everybody could think that way, but like, we don't ever have a space to talk. I don't know. So I see a value in doing that, and definitely including mental health, behavioral, like some of those other pieces in it.
Mm-hmm. So Cully, if we extend that concept and that idea, how would we target the audience? I mean, and not have it be the usual suspects, like go to, I've always, since we've been talking about the town hall, and I have to say David Mandel's the one who came up with the idea. So we'll just plant the responsibility there. So I want everyone to know that, Miriam, because it came out of your staff, not from us. So anyway, I've always thought of a town hall, meaning that it'll be virtual, but it would be focused on like Southern Oregon. And then we'll lean on Peter and have Peter figure out how do you get all of the thousands of people who have been surveyed to jump on and talk with us and talk with each other and stuff. So we'd rely on the local folks to figure out who is willing to spend an hour or two talking with us, educating us, and also learning about what's going on. And rely on our partners who have regional outlets in all over the state in their own districts or region offices. So it'd be cross-sector. It's not just going to be early childhood. So how's that line up with sort of what your concept is, or what you think would be of most value, any of you?
I guess I feel like from our community building work, we do a lot of convening around communities all the time, and people are happy to participate if they believe that they are being asked to help in some way. And so we have, we're slowly building out our own strategy for really sort of surrounding kids in Douglas County. And so we have brought people together to sort of ask parents what they really need, how much they use certain services, what's missing for them, so that they believe that they are investing in building our strategy. And there's some things that we're doing as a result. I mean, we've done a lot of convenings that have been to build our home visiting strategy. We're currently talking about piloting a child savings account for Douglas County. We've needed to have parents involved in sort of what should be there. We're starting an IDA for childcare supply to childcare providers. What does it need to look like? So I feel like it needs to be respecting their knowledge and their wisdom and saying, we need your information in order to be able to do our work better. I think that is the best way to organize a community meeting, so that people know what the information that they're providing is going to go in service to.
And Sue, if I may, I really do think some of the questions in the chat are really important. Again, so why are we doing this? And it could be for a lot of reasons with many different audiences. So not all town halls have to be alike.
Mm-hmm.
Engage, I was just chatting, you could engage employers. I just had a meeting this morning with the Central Oregon Human Resources Association. These are folks who deal with childcare all the time, and I hear from. So from a workforce standpoint, you can, in Central Oregon, a nonprofit that works with the school, the High Desert Education District, is working collaboratively with Boys and Girls Clubs and others who are dealing with childcare because school is out. So young children, there's a crossover there. Obviously that yeah, they're school age, but there's a crossover because most of those families have more than one kid, and in varying age groups, the time is ripe to engage them because this is way at the top of their mind right now. And so if you wanted to get parents who usually don't participate, these are the type of circles you could go to, and employers may want to engage because of the crisis that we're in. I think there might be some rich conversations, but I think the questions have to be different depending on what group you're gathering.
Good point.
Since I was called out earlier, Sue, I just wanted to add,
I knew you wouldn't mind.
So one possibility that I think that where the council might be able to leverage its leadership around town halls, and this actually goes back to a comment Liesl made yesterday, is there a possibility to use your leadership to also have all of the 5 agency directors present for a town hall to hear at the same time from family members? Because I do think that's actually something that doesn't happen all the time. So I think Liesl made that comment yesterday of, we keep on hearing from communities that they don't really want to talk to 5 different state agencies, and what they care about is their needs, not that's a problem of a different agency, not my agency. So I'm wondering if one of the leadership opportunities that can be exercised by the council is that opportunity to not only bring families together, but bring them with the 5 agency directors present to be actually listening at the same time to the community, and what that sort of sparks in terms of the shared, it's the same families that we're working with across agencies. So I think an opportunity to make that sort of more concrete through that process.
Well, that would address the goal that we have of making sure family voice is heard across sectors.
Mm-hmm.
And I have also seen the magic where Sue manages to get agency directors to meetings when she asks them, like no one else I've ever seen.
So far, we've been successful. Must be the agenda.
Clarification question. So you're suggesting families versus the providers, or both?
I think that's part of your discussion, but I think families could also be an important to hear from. But so I think that's part of what the council needs to discuss.
So I would just
Holly, people could
to the providers. I was talking about the providers of childcare, the ECE workers. I don't think we hear from them and their needs and understanding. I think there's a value to families too, but it's very different. And I guess I just wanted to be clear that that was the frame I had when I was thinking about it, was the ECE workers. And in my head, one of the things that came up in our last, at our last, yesterday, I'm sorry, my brain is slow today, but was that we don't, for the policy issues that are really impacting the early childhood space, that there's not enough voices at the table, that we don't hear from them. They don't have the lobby of K-12 sort of pushing for things. And so part of, to I think Anne's point of towards a greater good, I think if there are collective voices in a town hall format, it puts more oomph around some of the policy issues and levers that we've been discussing over the last couple of days, and what the governor has been focused on with her council as well. So I think there's a benefit for that reason too. And I think it should maybe be linked to it. I don't know if there's any legal challenges with making them linked, but if there aren't, that's something that I feel like would be important.
Yeah, I guess an interesting question for our agency partners, directors. And Miriam, you may already have a feel for this because you are in meetings with them all the time, is, they all talk about family voice and community engagement. And yesterday, they are all talking about wanting to find the CBOs who can actually get the work done on the ground. So I wonder if you have any sense of, if you had the four of them in a room with us, what would they want to see in a town hall? Are they looking for the providers and, kind of the people making the system run? Or are they looking for the families who are using the system, but maybe can't even get access to the system? And maybe it's both.
I think it's both. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, Angie. Our experience in other states when we've done this kind of thing is we've had provider groups come together and we've had family groups come together, because you're kind of asking different questions about their experiences and their wants and needs. And that I found, Sue, that in the family groups, you do have people who've participated in some of the services and some families who've not. And the conversation is kind of why or how they're recognized or what works or doesn't work. And so you get some perspective around that has raised interesting issues and potential policy solutions for some other state leaders.
I think another piece related to this that you guys have been chewing on is, for example, for forums for families, do you want families who have interacted with a variety of services, because that would impact your recruitment, or do you want to focus on different aspects of the overall early learning system? And the same could be true for providers as well. There's both the issue, which I think Kali raised, which I happen to agree with in early care and education, especially the teachers directly, also as well as administrators. There's a dearth of asking, but you could have the same things about how much do you want to look at things that are by a portion, and then how much might you want to bring people together who actually, either families or people who are providers of services, are providing different services, help people to sort of see and learn about their experiences with connections and disconnections and their opinions about where the state's an enabler, because I think of the systems focus, these are big questions. Where is the state an enabler, and where do they perceive the state as a barrier? You could do town halls, of course, every day. I mean, because there's no end of good things you could learn that would influence the sort of priorities that the council is seeking to focus on. But I do think that some of these questions about maybe it's a starting point, maybe it's easier, I don't know, to recruit initially service providers in one area versus multiple, right? And maybe that's simpler to get going and to get the comfort, because the other piece right here is who's the leader for the town halls? In other words, who's the facilitator? This is also, you talked about, David, an opportunity for agency directors, and it is a fantastic opportunity for them. It's an opportunity for council members, and it's an opportunity to partner and empower basically family partners and provider partners too.
Do we know that we have specific information that we need from community partners? Are there specific questions that are really important for you, Miriam, to get local information about, either from families or from providers or from workforce development people? I do think it's helpful to start with what do we need to know? And then there is also the other part of it, which is, how do we develop a sort of a constituency, an advocacy constituency, a support constituency? But I think what we're saying here is that that's a different purpose.
So, yeah, I mean, yes, so much every day, all of it on any number one of initiatives that, I think we're working on is I think we think about ECE, some of the opportunities that we have, it's, to build our system, hearing directly from providers and families in the real kind of co-design of what we're doing, right? So we've got opportunities with, for example, Spark, where, our work, our, quality assurance and technical assistance, our licensing rules. So I could just go on and on and on. I think the question is for this council, what is it that we kind of want to know, or what would be good to hear that would sort of enrich and kind of drive our work? And I think I tilt towards something that Harriet said earlier is where are those disconnects kind of experienced, across systems to continue to help us inform our, sort of our integration efforts. Because I think one of the hard parts right now is that particular conversation it feels like at the state level to be very disconnected from the reality on the ground in communities for families and for providers. And so, I think even when, at first when we started talking about this, and Carrie, you were saying some of the experiences with Build, I was like, well, that's kind of reminding me of some of what Raise Up Oregon, although we didn't use a town hall format, but we were kind of more blue sky, right? Yeah. Like what is it that you want to see happen, and what do you want to be true for young children and families in your communities? So at first I was like, oh, wow, well, it's not, not yet, not time yet again to go. But, we do have this progress report too. So maybe that's our lane to continue to kind of think through. And it was always envisioned that we would be doing this with more kind of in more feedback loops and bi-directional communication with communities. Like even in the things that we've experienced progress on, how has that been felt? Kind of on the ground, would be really interesting. So, yeah. I don't know if that's helpful, Anne, but that's where. Yeah. But I mean, there's a million things that we need. ELD needs, to in terms of initiatives that we're moving. But I think this would be the place where the council could really contribute by taking the lead.
And I know in our small group, Peg, you also talked about the importance of parental voice. So you may have some views on this. And I'm trying to figure out how you plan a discussion that says, how do we get parent information into systems integration? Sort of like, oh, that's a pretty abstract concept, but there might be ways to say where, exactly what you're saying, Miriam, about where are you experiencing true disconnects in the reality of your life. And I don't know. And Peg had some thoughts also about parental voice. And so I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot, Peg, but I wanted to just.
No, I think it is a really important thing. I worry a little bit about doing it in this time, that what we're going to get is all the concerns about COVID and the suffering that people are having. And not that we don't need to know about that, but I think we do need to know about that, but I'm not sure that informs the bigger picture, that it may be fairly narrow focused just because of the adversity that so many families are experiencing right now.
Peg, that may make the argument though for making sure that you are partnering where you have people who do have the ability to act. In other words, as let's just say you go with a family route and you're exploring, I'm just going to pick on healthcare. Okay, so, you may be saying to your families, like, when you are able to interact, whether it's telehealth now or in person, right, with your pediatrician or family medicine doctor, healthcare people, like, what do they help you get to? What are you learning? Okay, we'll probably hear some barriers because some, right, might be narrower than others of what's desirable. And so I'm just thinking in terms of the thing about not increasing people's frustration too, to basically make sure that you're partnering in some of this because of these issues that people will raise. They're going to raise systems problems, but they're also going to raise immediate things where you're going to want to be able to follow up and have a response, you know, and also I think probably as moral human beings, you know, feel like you're starting a something that can lead to a better conclusion or better outcome. So listening, I hadn't really thought about that beforehand, but I think that some issue of partnering basically with people who are in a position, both if people have an immediate problem, that there is some ability to talk to them about that can come up, and as well as some of these other things that would be stimulated by really the actions of the state, right, or an agency.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and maybe it. I can see that being helpful to families as far as at least feeling like they had a voice. And I think points out to us perhaps what we already know, but that much of the system is broken.
Yeah.
Right.
I think the other thing here maybe, you know, is like to grow your model for doing the town halls. Right. In other words, you don't need to be overly ambitious for town hall number 1. Right. You know, maybe have some different formats or different ideas and to sort of experiment a little bit. Right. So that you can develop this as a really great forum and as something that is allowing all of you to listen, to encourage, again, state leaders to listen harder. Right. But also to help to genuinely solve problems. I mean, it's some, again, not just the ones that someone says, I have a need, and it's a human to respond to the need that has arisen, right, that you can respond to, but the bigger issues that bring you together in your systems role.
So I guess one thing that's going through my mind is, as all of us volunteers on this call know, pulling any of this off is going to require support from staff, from consultants, from other consultants, whomever. So I think we would need to have a reality check on capacity to do something like a town hall. And let's even say that we're going to look out a ways. You know, we're going to target June maybe as a town hall, or September. I don't know. Who knows? We may still be in a COVID world, but and Peter, I think, brought it up as far as priority level. And if we know we've got limited staff capacity and we're using our consultants a lot, and I don't know how much more capacity Carrie and Harriet have. But from a just sort of a prioritizing or order of events, are we going to want to spend time in January at our meeting talking more about and trying to plan out what a town hall might look like? Who knows what things will look like in January, and targeting 6 or 8 months out? Or are you going to want to spend our time in January focused on, you know, childcare, for instance, and exactly what are we doing with the legislature starting in early February or mid-February around childcare or some of our other priorities? And I don't know, Miriam, you may have no sense right now of whether you're going to get some of the staffing positions you're asking for in your POPs and all of that. I mean, the state budget's still a question mark. So I think, and Miriam, I don't know if you even want to weigh in at this point, or if you can, as far as staffing, capacity, priorities, where would it help you the most to have us really focus in January and dig in? And your staff helping to tee all of this up. Big question, and I've not given you any advance warning, so you may want to think about it.
Yeah, I think I need to think about that a little bit. There's, I mean, I think one thing is I think really clear is that what's really needed, I think, to kind of continue momentum around the plan of Raise Up Oregon is really to make this a version of this progress report a public facing document kind of before we go into session that I think complements what is, where just to both help communities understand, and our partners understand where we have made progress. I think teeing up really important conversations for legislators, and then the work that the council kind of wants to see, wants to try to push to make happen both during session and through 2021. So that's where my mind is going, and maybe some connections to the town halls around that in that sort of progress report. So it's really impressive. And then there's also a lot of white space, which we know is we knew that before because it was a big, bold, comprehensive 5-year plan and, ambitious vision. And also because of the pandemic. And I think I called away for a minute, but I think Peg, you were, right as you were speaking and really talking to is, I think, which I really resonate and I identify with. We will hear a lot about suffering with COVID and a lot of the pain that families and communities are experiencing. And then that will also create, I think, an obligation to do as much as we can for as many people as we can in terms of immediate responses to the things that we hear and that we learn. But I think it could also inform it could be very powerful for the council, I think, to continue to drive awareness and momentum around the plan as a whole, and then some of the strategies that kind of need to be prioritized in the short term. I think, I don't know, Sue, if you were asking if capacity is sort of always an issue, we're the little engine that could here. And I think the other thing that COVID has taught me is that we, even some of the things we're having right now could look very different by January in terms of, our meeting. Do we get another federal stimulus package? Or do we know something by then, at least of the likelihood of that? There are just so many still things that continue to change. Where are we in the pandemic and that part that also I think would be important just to continue to plan for change.
Right.
The lesson of 2020. Yeah.
Well, and you've brought up a really good point, Miriam, about the progress report, and it really is very impressive. And I know you want to get it down to 5 or 6 pages, whatever. But having the council play a role in publicizing that and letting communities know about it, whether that feeds into town halls or some other effort. And I know one of the other topics I want to have us talk about at least a little bit is the role of the early learning hubs kind of in this conversation about how do we reach out to communities, what could be their role with the progress report. Do we want or expect the hubs to play a role in helping engage communities in that document? What's been done and what's needed in 2021. Mm-hmm. And I know most council members are on hub boards, or you're very connected to your hubs. So I don't know if you have thoughts about how we want to incorporate early learning hubs in this whole discussion of town halls, public engagement, advocacy, etc. I'd love to hear your thoughts about where the hubs fit into this.
I'd like to.
Angie, I'm involved with 2 of the hubs. I don't really have the answer to that, but I would say I think that they're really going to welcome the opportunity to play a role and to have dialogue or an audience with the council. So I like that we're talking about this. Back to the town halls, I love the idea, and the more we talk about it and think about all the things that we have on our plate, the priorities that we have, I'm just kind of playing with the idea of, are there other avenues or methods of achieving what we want to achieve without having to go to that extent for 2021? I don't mean permanently. I just see 2021 closing in on us really quickly, and I don't know that the town halls are really feasible and not only that, but also thinking about some of the things that were brought up earlier, just about the direction it might take. Is it really going to be focused on the plan, or is it going to be focused on COVID response? And if it's COVID response, I don't know that's where I want to go. I really want to focus on the plan. Anyways, I do know that my 2 hubs that I'm involved with would really welcome the opportunity to hear from and work with the council. Thank you.
Peter, were you going to make a comment around the hubs?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'd love just to have this discussion with our hub here and just ask them at what level are they interested in engaging, and is a partnering in a town hall at some point in the future, would that be of interest? I'd love to get their feedback on it. And just for what it's worth, I actually had a meeting today with our hub and the ESD's tech folks talking about doing a meeting with early childhood folks and K-12 folks in April. And the logistics, even to do a short Zoom meeting when you're inviting the public in, it was really impressive to me how much time has to go into that. We had talked about how many interpreters do we need? If we do breakout rooms, how do we make sure there's an interpreter in every breakout room? Just the logistics of getting that accomplished is challenging. But on the positive side, we will have this event in April, and I'll be able to bring back that experience to the council and say, this is how it worked for us or didn't work for us. So at least we'd have more info on that.
Right. That's great, Peter. Thanks. Other thoughts about hubs? Katie, you've talked about your hub a little bit, and I know they've been very involved with you on the childcare issue.
They have, and like Peter, I think it'd be really valuable to include them even in maybe our next meeting and give an hour or whatever it is, whatever the time slot is, to seeing what things are looking like on the ground and having that ability to have almost a work session of selection of a few topics of what we're seeing out there, how things are working on the ground. I'd be really interested in that. I hear about a lot of that from our hub, but I'd also like to hear from others around the state. I think that'd be really rich with information.
Okay, yeah, thumbs up from Peter. So why don't we make sure in January that we've got a hub conversation with hub reps, and that doesn't just have to be executive directors. It can be governance board members or people who are really active in the hubs. And it may be timely because the hub CCR&R consolidation possibility report is due at the end of December, I believe. So that will be out by then. So I'm sure we will be hearing about that and wanting to discuss that and the process for that review, I guess. Other thoughts about the hub's role in town halls or getting the progress report out and discussed in communities?
I agree with all that was said. I think it's important to get the input, and I think the feedback's important. One thing that I had realized, I think hopefully hubs will see the value, but I find myself sometimes talking about things. This is, it reinforces to me why there's a potential positive to a statewide conversation versus just a regional. And it may be logistically, as we've discussed, it's a lot, and maybe there's logistically, it may not be possible, but because of being on the council, being privy to what other communities are doing is something that I'm able to share information with our local folks. And I've thought many times, I wish they could see more of what's happening in other parts of the state, because, you know, there's just things to be learned, and I'm sure there are things to be learned from our hub as well. But I don't think I would know as much if I didn't have this sort of bird's eye view that I get as a council member. And as someone who's not in the weeds of the work, I can only imagine it'd be even more beneficial for people who are sort of closer to the ground. So I would just offer that. But I think their buy-in is key. And if they're not, then I don't see how it works, quite honestly.
Got it. For the town hall's work, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And could I say one other thing with Miriam was saying earlier about just being, you know, a little engine, and I think that actually is another point that has come up when we were doing our small group conversations. The infrastructure of ELD is really important, and there isn't enough staff. That's a problem. And we can't build a system with fidelity if there's not, you know, sort of staff to support that system. So it hasn't come, I know there's infrastructure goals, Miriam, but I feel like most of the infrastructure goals are not specific to building out ELD. And I don't know what role ELC can play, the council can play in that, but that's an issue. Like, as soon as you said it, I was like, yeah, that's like a big issue for everything else. And I don't think Miriam is in a position that she could advocate in the way we could. So it's just something I think the council needs to think about, and how we support.
Good point, Kali. You're right. My experience on volunteer boards is that frequently the board is only as effective and good as the staff support can allow it to be. So we're a team, I guess that means, right? Okay, any other thoughts, just random or not random, about town halls, roles of hubs, council connection to hubs, what you wish it were that it isn't? Obviously, we want to communicate with hubs, and we'll figure out how to do that when there's 16 of them. And yeah. Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to say I'm excited of where we landed. I think of having a conversation with hubs in January is a great idea. I think especially in the context of the progress report. I think something I've been reflecting on for a while too is you know, the early learning, we should really, I think it's important to have a conversation about the relationship of the Early Learning Council with the hub system, kind of independent of the relationship with the Early Learning Division and the hub system. So I just wanted to echo that. I think that, you know, having hubs in a conversation with hubs in January, I think in the context of a progress report for Raise Up Oregon and what that relationship could look like between the council and hubs, whether it's town halls or whether it's, you know, other opportunities, I think just really resonated with me.
Okay, sounds good. We'll put it on. Thank you, Miriam. Okay, we need to move to our next to last topic, which is around equity. And let's see, we are at 4:20, so we're in pretty good shape. When Remy and I talked with each of you before as we were trying to put the agenda together for this retreat, equity was a part of all of those conversations, as you all know. And it was one that all of us showed a lot of interest in. And as we know, just from the preliminary conversation we had yesterday, and Carrie's talking about some of the build perspectives, there are lots of different aspects of equity, from the personal end all the way over to the institutional and structural piece. So what we'd like to do, I assume, are we still going to try to do the
No, I think we could just have a brainstorming and get some reactions from the council members now, so that you feel like you can wrap up the meeting and that kind of thing after this.
So Carrie, do you want to sort of take us through that then and set up that brainstorming?
I mean, I think, there's definitely experts here at the table of the council. We heard Pat Allen's remarks yesterday as well. I mean, I think there's a couple of, there's like two big concepts that I think Sue and I are holding. One is, how do we intentionally make sure that as you're moving the work of the council forward, so as you delve into governance or childcare conversation or some of those priorities that you talked about, I think we're going to be constantly thinking about what are the equity issues embedded in those conversations that we need to make sure are part of your conversations. And your expertise that you might bring to those. And then the second one was that I think, so you heard about people who wanted to continue to develop personally an expertise and understanding around this issue. And so I think today's conversation was to get us food for thought for how Sue and I could think about, are there shared experiences that you would like to have? Are there kinds of guest speakers, materials that might, where you would spend time as a council engaging in some kind of material and reflective conversation for 20 or 30 minutes at every meeting, that over time is an arc where you have a shared experience around key equity issues or different thinkers' perspectives or that kind of thing, in addition to the actual implementation or policy design that you might be involved in on your specific priorities. So I think we just wanted to hear back from you if there's something we could be doing in particular, or if you just have questions back to us that you want us to come back and really give you some options of how we kind of embed equity into your work in 2021.
And it'd be helpful to know how you've seen it embedded in other organizations that you're involved in, and boards that you're on or boards that you run. This is obviously a topic that every board, I'm sure, is talking about and trying to figure out. So it'd be really informative, I think, for us to hear what approaches are you using yourselves for your boards, or you're seeing on other boards that you serve on.
We have a full collaboration meeting on Friday for our network, and it was suggested that we take the Oregon Equity Lens and we have 4 different work groups as part of the network, and basically have each one of the work groups work through what they're developing and through the equity lens, then convene back together and report to the full network on how that might influence. And then using the lens on if it works for people, it makes sense, then using that Oregon Equity Lens on a regular basis as part of the work group meetings.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Peter.
And Remy's put, when we originally thought we might do small groups, has put some questions in the chat box if that helps, and some brainstorming that we initially did, if that helps with food for thought of something that resonates, or if it generates a different approach or idea.
Yeah, Chair, first of all, I apologize because what I'm going to say, I remember I had homework to do, and I did do it, and I just didn't follow up with you on it. So we have looked at having an equity trainer come in and do work with the board. And I did find someone who is good, who is a person of color. I felt like if we're talking, what I had shared with Chair Miller was that if it's focused on racial equity, that I think it's important to have the lens of a person of color, and for for all of us to have the experience of a training together and have some sort of shared ideas and shared definitions. And so I had looked for someone who has familiarity in the ECE, ECD space or ELD space, not necessarily with Oregon per se, but just the space that we inhabit, so that that could be applied, and versus just a general equity consultant. So I think that would be helpful. I know like one of my boards is a foundation board, and so we've talked about it from a philanthropic standpoint, like not just equity broadly, but what does it mean for philanthropy? What does it mean for, what are the assumptions you hold? So like looking at it from a sector viewpoint, I think it's very important. And again, recognizing that not one, like a singular person of color sort of encapsulates all, but that vantage point is important. And I think we would have to define that. I think there are other equity issues that are not racial equity that if we want to explore, we can do that as well. We just have to be very clear on what it is we're focusing on. So yeah, I called it a training. I think the challenge is just time, because I don't think you can do it in an hour or two.
So that is a very key element in this, Cully, is the time allocation, and how the council wants to deal with that. If we've put together already a pretty full agenda for January, obviously. We have a lot going on in January, and equity is also a priority. So do we want to say, somehow we'll figure out, we'll take 2 hours of our January, 2 half days. We'll take a 2-hour segment and commit it, for instance, to an equity training. Do we want to schedule a separate meeting in addition to our 2 half days and just have it be focused on equity? I'm not sure where council members lie on this, but we need to be very realistic about what's possible in your lives and calendars.
I would say that, if we do 1 hour type things, maybe even 1 hour, or 2 hour type thing, that just keeps, from my perspective, always like learning about our history, or learning about our bias, or learning about institutional practices that have created disproportionate outcomes, and slowly being fed things that help us to understand others' lived life experience and how systems have impacted those. That to me, with the drip, drip, drip over time, if we don't have a lot of time to spend doing things together on that to me would be worthwhile. And then using, as Peter indicated, an equity lens, or implementing an equity lens, and then slowly over time, if it goes into an equity policy or some equity stance, and doing things that are more day-to-day operational, or things that we have to do to support decision making. So, and if it aligns to Raise Up Oregon, or anything that we know we're trying to accomplish, making sure that we align it or integrate it. So those are my quick thoughts. But if we don't have time to do long trainings, just small. And then if you say, hey George, read this thing, or hey George, watch this podcast, or hey George, here's a video on something, go watch this video. I'll watch it and I'll be ready. Especially if it's like 30 minutes.
Yes, that's fair. That's fair.
I would agree. I think there's a lot to be learned from kind of structured education. And I do think it's a bit like how I have approached trauma and individuals that have experienced trauma, that it's a continuum, that you become more sensitive to that the more you know, and the more you're exposed to that.
Yeah, Anne.
In thinking about the 4 levels that Harriet and Harry presented to us, I think our role is really at the institutional and structural level, and how are our institutions serving kids in Oregon addressing the needs of racially disparate outcomes for those kids. And so I would suggest that we not spend our time on the personal and interpersonal level, but on the institutional level in particular as a starting point to thinking about the structural level. And so the more that we can sort of pinpoint ways in which we have been remiss in this state and the ways in which we have to get better in order to promote racially equitable outcomes. And just because I know that you know that I'm going to say this, also equitable outcomes for those who are raised in rural areas, because rural is its own inequity. The more that we can do that, the better. And so, I was totally fascinated today. I didn't know the whole discussion about the kindergarten assessment that Miriam and Kali were talking about today, and about the language issues in it. That's something that we should be able to do something about. And that is an example of institutional racism that we should be able to do something about. And so I would suggest that we need to sort of operate at that level.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Great comments. Kali?
Well, I agree, and that's why I suggested having someone who understands the sector as being really critical, because you can't address the institutional things if you just have a generalist equity person. I think it's, so I agree 100% in that structural piece being where we lie.
And I just to build on that, Kali, I think that's exactly right. And I think there are people who know about how the early childhood, the ECE system has failed in certain ways. And just to alert us to, these are the 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different categories of areas where there has been failure in the system, and you need to be totally vigilant on these fronts, would be really helpful.
I think I maybe want to just try to take a stab at what reflect back what I think is I'm hearing. It's coming from this conversation. It was really interesting. Mm-hmm. So kind of at the institutional level, I've heard like a couple of comments around sort of the from a training perspective is, the application, operationalizing use of kind of an equity lens or a tool as we're thinking about institutional level change. And then I've also heard, I think, and particular to your last comments, is really also where are those policies, or what do we know already around kind of the presence within these institutions, child and kind of family serving institutions? Not that we could make a list, but what would we want to lift up in terms of policies right now that we would want to tackle, right? And name and elevate as things that are examples of where we've had, where we've had bias, racial bias show up in policies and systems, and, what can, particularly ones that are as salient for the council and we can do something about. I want to also then just maybe love to get reactions here and push a little bit. I totally agree. I think that's a great place for the council to start kind of on both fronts. It seems to me in my experience too, and I appreciate the levels of change document in terms of equity at the interpersonal level, because I think that when I think about its relevance to the council, I think about that as how are you all relative to each other and your relationship with each other able to kind of drive this work, because so equity work happens, and I think this work will happen in the context of our relationships with each other, kind of as a council, to feel like we can have the conversations that we need to have, raise the issues. And so when I think about some possibilities of training, I am wondering about that, right? So I would say, looking at the personal level, it's really all of you as council members have sat in a lot of probably and had training opportunities, critical race theory, other aspects of, implicit bias, privilege. So if everyone has that grounding, right, what do we need as a council to be able to, because part of our success, I think, in using and operationalizing an equity lens and doing something about that, those policies will be in part by defined our ability to talk about those issues with each other. And that comfort level. And I think there could be a space for training relative to that at kind of at the in a personal level in terms of thinking about how we work as a council and how we have those conversations. That's one thing. And then the second, I guess, last point I'll make, and I'll stop talking, is just really also want to pick up on kind of the intersectionality of these issues. So centering with race, but I think to your point, Anne, we know rurality, I think about gender plays a big impact in our field as well. So I think we need to think about gender issues. I think we need to think obviously about zip code and place. And I think the other one is adultism. So I say a lot of isms: sexism, adultism, classism, racism. And when I really think about adultism, we also, I think, tend to be more responsive to the needs of children, the more older they are, and the more they can articulate things for themselves and sort of sound like, talk like, act like little miniature grown-ups. And so I just want to say that too for the young children who can't express themselves here, that, that perspective and point of view, it also matters a lot as we think about a lot the isms that perpetuate our field. And I think that shows up when we talk about how are they children in identity affirming spaces, and how are children, in culturally affirming spaces, and what are their experiences like in the systems. And I just want to hold space for that too.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. Lots of isms, to say the least. So what I'm hearing, and Carrie, see if you're on the page, it seems to me that following up with Kali on whoever this person is as a potential trainer focused on EC and kind of the structural and institutional end would be potentially a place to land for January. And maybe we'll have to talk to the trainer and see if hopefully we can do it in 2 hours. Be lucky to carve out 2 hours. Anyway.
Or if it's kind of like a series of things. So if things can be broken up in overtime.
Oh, yeah.
Right, explore that too.
Yeah, I'm expecting this to probably be a constant in our council agendas. I think we should also follow up on George's thought about, sending to council members any great podcasts or materials, whatever, especially if it's at any one of the 4 levels that you listed, Carrie, knowing that we can do some individual reading and learning. It doesn't have to all be at council meetings. Mm-hmm. So, and Miriam, I know you've got, you have an equity director now, right?
Yes, we have Melinda Avila, who's our equity strategy director at ELD. I think we might have had a chance to meet her, get introduced to her right before COVID, I think at one of our early meetings.
Okay.
And so she's available to support. We also have Nikisha Knight Coyle, I think many of you have known, has been with ELD for a long time in various roles, who's been doing work specifically around racial equity and in licensing right now. So she's on a job rotation. So her and Melinda are working really closely together.
Okay, so why don't we kind of work on that and see how we want to tap into that expertise that you've brought on board.
Absolutely. And any reactions to sort of the kind of interpersonal level of change and sort of us as and from a training needs perspective, or, do we want to have some, opportunity to have these kinds of conversations among us, and how we work as a council and where we are, where we're coming from on these issues. Because I would also want to convey that to, to Melinda and Nikisha as well.
Part of me thinks, because we don't have a lot of time, I'm I guess I care more about the structural institutional things because I want to make a difference in the system. And if we have a short period of time, I want us to focus on that. I think that there will be interpersonal things that arise in talking about the structural institutional things. I also think that if we're doing podcasts and things like that, that is a place, granted it's not a conversation, but a lot of interpersonal development happens listening to podcasts and things of that nature. I know I listen to them a lot and they're always insightful in my own growth around racial equity. So I can see that being a tool for that. It doesn't, the interdynamics, which that you were talking about, it's not quite achieved in that. I just don't know with limited time if it's possible. So it's not so much I'm anti, but it's more if I have to prioritize, I prioritize the structural institutional change.
Okay, is that where council is generally? Do people, yep, Peter's agreeing. Yep, okay. Okay, so let's work on this, but obviously in the near future, so we can try to get somebody lined up and scheduled to be a part of a January meeting. All right, thank you, council members. We obviously are on a journey, and journeys are always exciting and never ending is my experience. Okay, last and not least is January and meeting dates. So you now have a variety of calendars. We're hoping to stay away from Thursdays because there's some conflicts for council members on Thursdays. So what we're hoping to do is switch to either the fourth Tuesday of the month or the fourth Wednesday of the month. So Tuesdays or Wednesdays, probably afternoon, at least to date, that's what you've all preferred rather than morning, although maybe we are more awake in the mornings, I don't know. And then the whole idea of we meet like, the fourth Wednesday of January, and then we take a 2-week break, and then we meet the second Wednesday of February. So we have time to recover from the meeting, and staff has time to answer questions or whatever we might need in between meetings, but 2 half days. And when I talked to you before this meeting, everybody agreed 1 half day quarterly isn't nearly enough to do our work. So I think we're all committed to 2 half days. So it's a question of day of the week, week of the month, and how far in between those 2 half days. And I'm open to ideas, feedback. What are you all willing to commit to for 2021?
Thursdays work better for me, and I'd be happy with any kind of sequence, whether it's the 4th Thursday and then the 1st Thursday of the next month, or whatever.
How about not Thursdays?
Not Thursdays? Sorry.
I'm hoping Tuesday or Wednesday.
Yeah, Tuesday would work better for me than Wednesdays.
Okay.
Okay, just to make your life difficult, Tuesdays don't work as well for me, but I can make them work. I can make them work. It's just Tuesdays are our day internally in our institution to have all of our institutional meetings, but I can always rearrange, and like Peter, I don't care whether it's sequential, whether it's back to back or anything like that. I'm fine.
Okay, well, we got one Wednesday and one Tuesday. Yes, sorry.
And also, just Sue, we also sent back to you specific dates that don't work for us. And I'm sorry I've been difficult in that scheduling.
That's okay. Kali, what were you saying? Oh, do you care? Sorry, I thought you were speaking. Okay, who else cares about Tuesday or Wednesday? Any other preferences?
Tuesdays are fine with me as long as it's the 4th and the 2nd. I have commitments in the afternoon on the 1st and the 3rd Tuesdays of the month.
Okay. How do
I put my comment in the chat. I don't know if you saw. So Tuesdays are not great for me because we have staff meeting every Tuesday afternoon, and it's not something I can miss. It'd be hard to change it.
And that's every Tuesday. Okay, so Peter, I'm getting confused. Are you who doesn't like Wednesdays?
I can make Wednesdays work. I'm like Ann, I can switch things around if needed.
Okay, thank you. How about the fourth Wednesday of the month? Does that generally work for people? And then it would be this following month would be the second Wednesday, if we're going to do it 2 weeks apart. Head nodding. So Miriam, 2 weeks apart, is that good for staff? Would you rather have it 1 week apart? 2 weeks is just so we aren't 2 days back to back. I think this is rough.
Yeah.
but-
Yeah, 2 weeks, I think, right? Remy, David, any thoughts?
Wednesday, the 13th of January? Is that what you're looking at?
The fourth, it'd be the fourth Wednesday in January and then the second Wednesday in February. Because it's fourth Wednesday would be the beginning date and then it'd be 2 Wednesdays later. That would be the second half day. So that was one of the calendars that I sent out to you, I think yesterday maybe, or I don't know. Sorry for all the emails, you guys. It's been busy. So you should have this somewhere from me with Wednesdays. And Remy can send it out again. So our next meeting would be Wednesday, January 27th. And then that's the first half day. The second half day would be Wednesday, February 10th. And am I correct in saying you prefer afternoons rather than mornings? Or not?
For me, yes. And there are occasional Wednesdays where I have a meeting until 2 p.m., just saying, but not on the ones that you just called out.
Okay. George, are afternoons better for you than the first thing in the day?
First thing in the day, 8 o'clock. My schedule even 7:30, but 8 o'clock. And if we do things at 3 o'clock, not that bad either, but I can always, if I get a month's notice, I can always create my schedule. And even if it's 2 weeks notice, I can make adjustments.
Okay, thank you. So what do you want to do, council? How many of you want to stick with afternoons? I guess that's the way to approach this.
Whatever.
Whatever. So
Yeah, mornings are almost impossible for me.
who just said that?
That was Peg.
Oh, mornings are almost impossible. Okay. Okay, so we'll stick with afternoon 1 to 5 on the fourth Wednesday of January and then the second Wednesday of February. So Remy, as soon as we're done or tomorrow, will you send out the new calendar and then destroy all the other calendars that are in your inboxes? Because we had Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays all lined out. So, okay. Wednesday, January 27th. Sounds like a banner day for a meeting.
And just in case, full disclosure, I have a Eastern Oregon University meeting from 2 to 4. So I don't mind. I can do 1 to 2 and then 3:30 to 5 with us.
Thank you, George. I have a
And
feeling.
then just the other note, since we're entering session, I'm assuming that participation by agency directors will be fairly contingent.
Thank you, David. We know where their priorities lie. Okay, I think we are ready to wrap up. I just want to make a few comments and observations. First is to thank all of you council members for hanging in there on a very intense full 2 half days. Your input is obviously critical, and we have accomplished a lot in the last year, and obviously we have a lot to do in 2021. So I think we're all energized to do it. We know how important it is. But I definitely want us to take at least one breath, acknowledging that we've come a long way. And, you know, part of it is we have a governor who absolutely is committed to this agenda. Part of it is that we have a legislature that showed their commitment with the Student Success Act and committing 20% to early learning. So we don't want to take that for granted, and we'll have to hold on to it or expand it if we can, but getting that support. And I know Miriam's played a key role in both of those arenas, because she's built some great relationships with the governor and legislative leaders. I will send a note to the RURIAC members as soon as Remy sends me their emails, and thank them for being a part of our session yesterday and their ongoing monthly meetings to move Raise Up Oregon forward. So we're lucky to have good partners. I think we were all impressed yesterday by how well prepared the agency directors were.
It was
blew me away, all of them. And Miriam, you'll have to listen to the tape or whatever. I think you'd be pleased to see your peers. They did come well prepared. So they have bought into this, which is awesome. Congratulations to Harriet and Carrie for getting us through yet another retreat, and Remy for all of your prep to make this happen, and David for always being there when we need you. We have amazing staff support. They also are the authors, along with Miriam, of the progress report. And you can imagine that report wasn't written overnight. So there's an amazing amount of work that has gone into that. I don't know if it's version 14 or 18, but anyway, thank you, all of you who put that together. It's going to be exciting to roll that out. We do have a lot to do, but obviously we'll get it done because that's what we're here for and that's what we're all committed to. So thank you all. Any other final comments before we close out and say have a good evening and happy holidays, whatever they might look like this year? Who knows?
Stay healthy.
Yeah, vote. Be sure to vote.
Yeah, vote.
Mm. One just final thought, and I'm with us looking out for the structure or the system or the institution, but I do think if we are grounded, you know, over time, an hour or 30 minutes, and we have some reflection, some reading, some personal growth, some different things that we do, and we do stay collectively together and talk about our journey. I'll just say with equity, with systems, with our own biases, like that'll just connect us better and we'll likely make decisions that are a little stronger. And I think it's an ongoing thing, not just a, you know, a once in a while thing or just a one-time thing. Sorry if I took away from anything.
No, that's excellent. And I think that's exactly what Miriam was saying as well, George. I think you guys have the same perspective on that. So thank you for calling that out. And I think the more often we get together, even if it's two-dimensional, the more we'll go down that road together. So thanks. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your afternoon.